The Mute at Hogwarts. Hello again, dear adventurers of the multiverse. Thanks for joining us once more on this epic journey. Remember, this story is pure science fiction from our wild imagination. So don't go trying to summon dragons in your backyard. The rights of this amazing novel belong entirely to its original author. We are only the narrators. Do you want more adventures? Show some love to our YouTube channel with a subscription and a like. And if you want exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting for you with open arms. Chapter 276 Shock. The evening banquet was as lively as ever. The wizards, having spent the day enjoying themselves in Hogsmeade, burst into action, displaying the generosity expected of their age. Even after having already consumed a generous portion of candy and other snacks, they devoured everything on the table. If it weren't for the late hour, they might even have feasted on the jack-o'-lanterns decorating the Great Hall. After all, with candles, they looked a bit like pumpkin cakes. Of course, the professors were also delighted. With the exception of Snape, who frequently glanced at Lupin with a more distant expression than usual, everyone else was immersed in the festive atmosphere. Oh, and then there was Dumbledore. For some reason, he was late for dinner today, and his expression was strange, with his eyes constantly glancing towards the Gryffindor table. While there were two students who deserved his attention, Gwen and Harry, Gwen, who had been keeping an eye on Dumbledore, was certain he wasn't looking at either of them. His gaze was directed at Ron. That was quite interesting. Guan Qiong rubbed his chin, his mind racing. The joyous banquet ended with a performance of the Hogwarts ghosts. After a day of high spirits, the students finally began to tire and prepared to return to their dormitories for bed. Guan Qiong, Hermione, Harry, and Ron followed the rest of the Gryffindors along their usual route toward Gryffindor Tower. However, traffic seemed to be a bit congested today, forcing them to stop in the corridor before the entrance to the Gryffindor common room. The road ahead was completely blocked, and every student craned their heads, trying to figure out what was going on. Had some idiot forgotten the command again, or was the fat lady showing off her singing skills, and they needed to wait until she finished before they would open the door? Guan Qiong's physical development was superior to the others, allowing him to stand taller and see what was happening ahead. "What's going on up ahead?" Hermione asked. Guan Qiong looked ahead. The students had blocked the fat lady's portrait, making it difficult to see clearly, but he could still make out some details through the cracks, such as the cracks in the painting. Something seems to have happened to the fat lady's portrait. Guan Qiong shone a light for the others to see. Then, from the front, Percy's voice came. As the head boy and a Gryffindor, he had just squeezed forward to see what was happening. But the situation was clearly beyond his expectations, and his voice became shrill and panicked. "Someone call Professor Dumbledore? Quick!" Students at the back of the group heard the voice and ran outside. A moment later, Dumbledore approached, accompanied by Professor McGonagall, the head of Gryffindor House. Students spontaneously made way, and some followed behind Gryffindor, hoping to get to the front to see what was happening. Guan Qiong and his group were among them, and they reached the front as they had hoped. "Oh my God!" Hermione cried out in shock at the sight. Harry and Ron also looked horrified, as did Percy beside them. Only Gwen remained expressionless, not even glancing at the severely damaged and shredded fat lady's painting. Instead, she looked at Dumbledore beside her. Dumbledore's expression was strange, solemn, yet calm, as if everything was under control. He looked at the severely damaged portrait before him, then turned to look at Professor McGonagall beside him. "We need to find her, Professor McGonagall. Please go to Mr. Filch immediately and have him search every painting in the castle for the fat lady." "I understand," Professor McGonagall nodded, adding, "We'll also mobilize the other professors to search the castle to make sure the attacker is still inside." She waved her wand, and the shattered pieces of canvas transformed into birds, which flapped their wings and flew off to other parts of the castle, searching for the culprit who had destroyed them. "Of course, that's as it should be," Dumbledore nodded. Although neither he nor Professor McGonagall revealed the attacker's identity, everyone knew the answer: the name. Sirius Black. Only he could commit such a heinous act. Professor McGonagall went to find Mr. Filch, the castle caretaker, while Dumbledore arranged for the students to return to the Great Hall. He also sent a message for students from the other three houses to do the same. With the exception of Gryffindor, the students from the other three houses all had confused expressions on their faces. "Something has happened at school. You'll probably hear some news, but don't be afraid. The professors and I will protect you, Dumbledore told everyone. Now, the professors and I need to conduct a thorough search of the castle. For your safety, you'll probably have to spend the night here. The team leaders will guard the Great Hall entrance, the head boy and head girl will be in charge, and information will be relayed through the ghosts. Safety is paramount, Dumbledore spoke, then waved his wand. The dining tables flew to the edges of the Great Hall, and hundreds of soft purple sleeping bags appeared on the ground. This was their bed for tonight. Get some rest, Dumbledore said as he left the Great Hall. Before leaving, he glanced at Gwen, as if about to say something, but ultimately remained silent. Gwen, Hermione, Harry, and Ron grabbed a few sleeping bags and gathered in a corner, just as they usually did in the Gryffindor common room. It's strange. How did he get in? I mean, there are so many professors here, and Dumbledore's here, and he's just come and gone, Ron said, tucking himself into a sleeping bag, leaving only his head exposed. The other students were similarly exhausted. Though they'd been exhausted all day, Black's story had finally given them a bit of energy to discuss what had happened. Who knows? He got out of Azkaban a while ago, and it's not much different from Hogwarts, Hermione echoed her doubts. He must have some special method. Maybe it was taught to him by Voldemort. He's one of Voldemort's right-hand men, Harry joined in the discussion. Suddenly, he looked at Guan Qiong, who was still standing outside the sleeping bag, in confusion. Qiong, why are you still outside? Just now, he clearly remembered Guan Qiong crawling into the sleeping bag. Guan Qiong looked at the scene around him, smiled and shook his head, a different light flashing in his eyes. Then, he crawled into the sleeping bag, just like everyone else. Chapter 277 Time goes back. Let's flash back to the morning of October 30th. In the Gryffindor common room, a Gwen appeared out of nowhere and quickly cast a disappearance charm on herself. Then, he turned his attention to his surroundings. It was morning. One of him was on his way to Hogsmeade. Another had returned via the Time Turner and was taking Harry to Professor Lupin's office to recommend him learning the Patronus charm. And the third had returned from tonight, ready to inquire about Sirius Black. His intuition told him that there was something missing from the novels. Gwen glanced at Adriana, who lay in the chair before her. The common room was empty, and Adriana wasn't sprawled out in the chair to sleep as usual. Instead, she half closed her eyes and tilted her head towards Gwen's dormitory. A predatory expression crossed her face. With Gwen, Harry, Ron, and Hermione away from the school, this was her perfect opportunity. If she moved quickly, she could capture Scabbers the rat and take him away without attracting anyone's attention. Just as Adriana was about to strike, her ears suddenly perked up and pointed in one direction, like antennas receiving a signal. Startled, Adriana turned her gaze away from the boys' dormitory and toward the castle's exterior. Her already gloomy expression darkened even more, even taking on a hint of ferocity. Adriana leaped to her feet, landed on the ground, and headed outside. Guan Qiong, maintaining her presence dispelling charm, followed behind Adriana. However, this time, Adriana's target seemed to be moving, too, and she couldn't quite grasp Sirius Black's location. She had to stop and turn her ears frequently to determine her next move. Guan Qiong noticed that they had already walked the 4th floor 3 times. Sirius Black seemed to be avoiding something, circling the castle. As one of the 4 individuals who created the Marauders map, he was well versed in the castle's secret passages, making it difficult for Adriana to locate him immediately. Along the way, Guan Qiong followed Adriana and encountered herself and Harry coming out of Lupin's office. However, he remained under the presence-removing spell and did not encounter his past self. Adriana paid no attention to Guan Qiong and Harry. However, as they passed by, she seemed to have a vague sense of something and looked around, but she could not find Guan Qiong hiding behind her. In this way, Guan Qiong and Adriana searched until the afternoon, and finally found Sirius Black, who had sneaked into Hogwarts, in an empty classroom on the 5th floor of Hogwarts Castle. At the same time, there was another person. Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at the skinny black dog in front of him and was momentarily distracted. His blue eyes, through his glasses, showed a faint sadness, perhaps thinking of how Sirius looked in school. It took him a long time to recover. His face became serious and grim. He slowly said, "It seems you are not doing well, Black. But there is nothing we can do about it. After all, your master has fallen, Dumbledore," Sirius growled, but his steps were slowly retreating. One can only say that he is worthy of being the headmaster of Hogwarts. He noticed his presence the moment he entered Hogwarts Castle, and even though he knew every secret passage in the castle, he could not escape his pursuit and was eventually blocked here. At this point, he had no way to escape. I sensed some discordant aura in the castle last time, but I couldn't be sure. I just didn't expect it to be you. Dumbledore looked at Sirius in front of him, his tone becoming serious. What promise did Voldemort make to make you so devoted? Even after all these years since his death, you're still going after Harry. Do you think he'll be able to come back after Harry's death? Voldemort gave me nothing, Dumbledore. Sirius shook his head. In fact, I never betrayed anyone, nor did I join the Death Eaters. Dumbledore fell silent. He hadn't expected Black to still be trying to argue at this point. Faced with the absolute truth, with James and Lily's bodies, these excuses paled in comparison. If he hadn't betrayed them, how could Voldemort have found James and Lily's location? The Fidelius charm possessed an unbreakable level of secrecy. The only loophole was the secret keeper. And James and Lily's secret keeper was Sirius Black. I'm sorry, Black, but I don't want to hear these arguments anymore. I'm old and don't have the energy to dwell on these painful things. Dumbledore gently raised his hand. He didn't hold his wand, but the pressure he brought was unmatched by any other wizard. His expression indicated that if Sirius Black didn't surrender, he would be seriously injured. Sirius shuffled back, but the classroom was so small that there was no escape. Dumbledore, listen to me. It wasn't me who betrayed him, but Peter Pettigrew. I temporarily replaced the secret keeper, but he defected to Voldemort's side, and he's still alive, right beside Harry. He's the rat. Black spoke rapidly, but Dumbledore paused, his arms still raised resolutely. Regardless, he decided to subdue Sirius first. He wasn't surprised by Dumbledore's distrust. The secret keeper change hadn't been widely known, and James and Lily were murdered before he could inform Dumbledore. Add to that Peter Pettigrew's misleading statements and his death, and it was practically incontrovertible. Only Adriana believed him. After all, they were relatives, and Sirius Black had practically grown up under her care. Just as Dumbledore was about to subdue Sirius, another voice rang out from outside the classroom. Wait a moment, Albus. An orange cat leaped in, placing itself between Dumbledore and Sirius. Perhaps you should hear his explanation. Perhaps the truth behind that incident isn't as everyone knows, Adriana said, glaring at Dumbledore through the cat's eyes. Dumbledore looked at the cat that suddenly appeared before him in surprise. He recognized it. After all, such a distinctive appearance was rare among cats, and it was the pet of the well-educated Miss Know-It-All. However, he had not expected that this cat was actually an animagus. And, moreover, an acquaintance. Adriana? You're not dead. Dumbledore was slightly surprised. Chapter 278 Dumbledore's Thoughts. Dumbledore still recalls that night. 11-year-old Adriana sat on a stool, the sorting hat hanging over her head. It took a full 5 minutes of hesitation before it finally sorted her into Ravenclaw. That little girl, she has the aloofness of a Slytherin, the eagerness to learn of a Ravenclaw, the drive of a Gryffindor, and the tenacity of a Hufflepuff. It's truly a puzzling situation. Back in the headmaster's office, the sorting hat shared its insights into Adriana's inner world and, after much hesitation, placed her in Ravenclaw. Everything she does is a quest for something. I don't know what it is, but I think Ravenclaw might be the best house for her, the hat said. And so, Adriana entered Ravenclaw and graduated with top grades. In fact, by her 5th year, she had learned everything Hogwarts could teach her. For the next 2 years, she immersed herself in the library, searching for answers. Unfortunately, by the time she graduated, she still hadn't found what she sought. The next news he heard about Adriana was her departure from the Black family and her challenge to Voldemort. I thought you were dead, Adriana. After you challenged Tom, you haven't been heard from since, Dumbledore said with a smile. Although Adriana had refused to join the Order of the Phoenix during the fight against Voldemort, she hadn't sided with him and had even secretly assisted them. Although Sirius Black had played a role in this, Dumbledore still considered her one of his own. So, upon hearing that she had challenged Voldemort, he felt only regret. More or less, Adriana licked her paw, her cat-like eyes gazing at Dumbledore. Are you cursed? Dumbledore's azure eyes gazed at the large orange cat before him. A single glance revealed Adriana's current state. Yes, a lot happened back then, Adriana said, wagging her tail without further comment. Dumbledore saw that Adriana didn't want to talk about the past, so he didn't ask any further questions. He frowned slightly at the black dog Adriana had stopped him from following. You want to protect Sirius Black? Yes, Dumbledore. Although my guarantee is not valid due to my status, I will still stand up. Adriana looked back at the emaciated Sirius Black behind her, a hint of tenderness in her eyes. I believe him. He's a good boy, different from the other Blacks. Isn't that why you let him join the Order of the Phoenix? He wouldn't hurt his friends. Dumbledore fell silent. To be honest, when he first heard the news, he didn't want to believe it. After all, the whole thing was too bizarre. However, considering Sirius Black's family background, he could only assume that Sirius had fallen back into darkness. After all, the Black family's pursuit of the dark arts and pure blood was ingrained in their blood. So, what is the truth? Dumbledore lowered his hand and looked at Sirius, who stood behind Adriana, asking the question again. It was Peter Pettigrew. He was the one who defected to Voldemort. I suspected Lupin would defect to Voldemort. After all, he was a werewolf. He also suspected me, because I was from the Black family, and we didn't trust each other. Sirius Black recounted the events of the past. To better protect James and Lily, I gave Pettigrew the secret keeper role. I thought it was a good strategy. Voldemort would come to me, but he wouldn't have imagined we would use a weakling like Pettigrew as the secret keeper, but I didn't expect Pettigrew to be even weaker than I thought. He defected to Voldemort and revealed James and Lily's location. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes in pain. Then why didn't you tell everything, instead of staying alone in Azkaban for 12 years, Dumbledore continued. Because this is all my fault. If I hadn't asked Lily and James to change the secret keeper, nothing would have happened to them. Sirius Black's face was filled with remorse. It was this remorse that had kept him alone in Azkaban for 12 years, a kind of self-exile. And I thought Pettigrew was dead, died that day. Black's face began to swell with ferocity. But I didn't expect he was still alive, living in someone else's home as a pet in the form of a mouse for 12 years. Dumbledore thought of the Weasley mouse. He had seen it when the first Weasley child entered school. It was truly a long-lived mouse. Dumbledore had thought of it before, but he hadn't thought of anything else. But now, combined with Sirius Black's explanation, it does sound very logical. Dumbledore nodded. If what Sirius said was true, then it seemed like the right time to go to the Gryffindor common room, capture Peter Pettigrew, and put an end to this. However, the wise Dumbledore was thinking of something more profound. Something about love, protection, and hope. So, what are your plans now? I'm going to capture him, kill him, tear him apart, make him regret what he did, and make him realize that betrayers never have a good end. Sirius Black roared, his face filled with ferocity. While his 12 years in Azkaban hadn't lost his sanity, they had inevitably taken a toll on his mind, making him more extreme and impulsive. Dumbledore didn't comment, but instead looked at Black and continued, and then what? And then, Sirius Black looked at Dumbledore in confusion. Yes, then, do you plan to be taken back to Azkaban, or continue on the run, or perhaps even meet Harry, though I doubt Harry would be too keen on seeing you right now? Confusion flickered in Sirius Black's eyes. He truly hadn't considered anything that far ahead. He had only one goal in mind since escaping Azkaban. Kill Peter Pettigrew and protect Harry. As for what happened next, he hadn't thought about it. You should think about it carefully. I remember you're Harry's godfather. James and Lily appointed you as Harry's guardian. Don't you want to take on this responsibility? Chapter 279 Plan in Progress. Of course I do, Sirius Black said eagerly. Then you might want to think carefully about what to do next, Dumbledore said with a smile. He suddenly realized that Sirius Black's innocence would be a good thing for Harry. After all, from what he knew, Harry had never received any love or care at the Dursleys' house. This had always made him worry that the child would go astray. And now that Sirius Black had arrived, that gap could be filled. You are as wise as ever, Dumbledore, Adriana said softly, having also thought of the key point. If they just went over and captured Peter Pettigrew and killed him now, the truth would remain as it was before, and Pettigrew would become a hero. Although it was puzzling that a hero would transform into a mouse and hide in someone else's house for 12 years, it was also possible that he had been bewitched by Sirius's evil dark magic, wasn't it? She had no doubt that some in the Ministry of Magic would, in order to maintain their own authority, disregard the truth and allow Sirius to continue to bear the label of a criminal. Only Sirius Black's eyes remained confused. Don't make any excessive moves, and don't hurt anyone else. I will also turn a blind eye to your minor actions. I hope you can resolve this matter this school year. I don't want to see Dementors in the school next year, Dumbledore demanded. That's only natural, Adriana nodded. Dumbledore glanced at the cat and dog, then at an empty space somewhere. He nodded and walked out of the empty classroom. Only Adriana and Sirius Black remained inside, and of course, Guan Qiong, who was still under the presence dispelling charm. Guan Qiong scratched his head. Dumbledore had obviously seen him, which was natural. After all, the presence dispelling charm had no effect on a wizard of Dumbledore's caliber. Just now, Dumbledore glanced at him, and the two of them exchanged glances. Guan Qiong read a meaning in Dumbledore's eyes. He seemed to want Guan Qiong to supervise the cat and dog, to prevent them from doing anything too outrageous. After all, Guan Qiong's presence in the classroom with Adriana indicated that he was aware of the situation between Sirius Black and Adriana. Well, it was his own fault. Fortunately, he didn't need to intervene, he could just watch from the side. That was a light-hearted statement. Off to the side, Sirius Black looked at Adriana. And Adriana, what are we going to do now? He certainly wanted to be Harry's godfather. He felt a sense of guilt for the child, equal to the pain he endured during his 12 years in Azkaban. He deeply wanted to care for him and make amends. However, he also knew that he was still a fugitive, and rumors spread that it was he who had informed on Voldemort, leading to the deaths of Harry's father and mother. He was sure that if he appeared before Harry, Harry would be furious and kill him to avenge his parents. Adriana's face was filled with helplessness, helpless against her nephew whose brain had been practically eaten by the Dementors. She scratched the ground with her claws for a moment, then, with a slight twitch of her ears, she said to Sirius Black, "We must capture Peter Pettigrew, but we can't kill him. Furthermore, we need to lure Harry out to a secluded place, then, we need to transform Pettigrew back in front of Harry and tell him what happened. It would be best if we had a few witnesses. Your friend Lupin has come to this school to teach defense against the dark arts. Perhaps he'll trust you. And Hermione, she's a good kid, kind-hearted and intelligent, I see, Auntie. I'll go find Pettigrew now," Sirius said excitedly. As for where to lure Harry, he already had an idea. The Shrieking Shack. No one would come there. It was very secluded and directly accessible from Hogwarts. Wait a moment, Adriana called out to Sirius. She remembered the hidden power of Voldemort within Peter Pettigrew. If that power were unleashed within Hogwarts, it would cause a huge stir. While she was confident she could suppress it, the truth would be revealed. Dumbledore would then be forced to intervene. Although he personally trusted Sirius Black because of Adriana, as the school's headmaster, he wouldn't be able to act as he pleased if everything became public knowledge. After all, there was the Ministry of Magic, and Dementors were everywhere. We can't capture him within Hogwarts. Find a way to scare him, let him know you're coming, and then escape, Adriana instructed Sirius Black. Sirius was a little confused, but when he met Adriana's gaze, he obeyed. I understand, Aunt Adriana, Sirius Black agreed, and hurried off. In the school, only Dumbledore had a strong sense of perception, able to immediately detect his presence. The other professors could still hide as long as he didn't get close to them. Adriana didn't leave, but instead sniffed the air in confusion, her eyes rolling around. Guan Qiong, standing by, watched Sirius leave, feeling somewhat helpless. He probably knew what Sirius was going to do. After 12 years in Azkaban, his temper was not very good. Fat lady, this is troublesome. However, Guan Qiong returned after everything happened, and he couldn't change history. Besides, the fat lady was fine, right? She just needed a few days off to rest and change her frame. In front of Guan Qiong, Adriana began to walk around the classroom, sniffing the air from time to time, even forcing Guan Qiong to change seats. Just as Guan Qiong was wondering what Adriana was looking for, Adriana suddenly spoke. "Boy, come out quickly, I found you." Although his face was not looking at Guan Qiong, the meaning of his words was clearly directed at Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong frowned, but did not continue to hide. He gently waved his wand, and the existence elimination spell disappeared from his body. "It's you, Guan Qiong. I have always felt that something is wrong." Adriana turned her head to look at Guan Qiong and said with a look of understanding. Then, she gently walked to Guan Qiong's legs and sniffed. "It is indeed this, the smell of divinity." Chapter 280 Road. Divinity, Guan Qiong asked, emitting a flash of light as he gazed at Adriana at his feet. Logically, Adriana shouldn't be able to detect him under the existence removal charm. He'd tested it before. Professors McGonagall, Snape, and even Flitwick couldn't directly see through it. This unicorn magic possessed a unique and special quality. Yet, Adriana had actually discovered it. Her abilities were probably comparable to those professors, perhaps even slightly stronger, but not to Dumbledore's level. Yes, boy, divinity. I didn't expect you'd master that magic so quickly. Adriana looked up, gazing at Guan Qiong with interest. You're learning the Patronus charm, right? I remember it was an elective at Hogwarts, and you don't learn it until 6th year. Where did you learn it, Professor Lupin? Guan Qiong didn't hide anything. It wasn't something that needed to be concealed. In return, he questioned Adriana about what she just said. What is this divinity? The positive emotions that make up a Patronus? No, not really. Adriana licked the fur on her paw. The Patronus charm is just a stepping stone to divinity, but not every wizard who learns it can awaken it. As for what divinity is, it's hard to explain, but if you want to advance your magical path, to reach a level untouchable by others, you need to possess it. She sniffed Guan Qiong's leg again, finding a delightful aroma. How nostalgic. The scent of divinity, though still faint, is at least there. Boy, it seems the two-hearted's physique is even more beneficial to magic than I imagined. Guan Qiong frowned in thought, unaware of his own supposed divinity. The only difference was that his Patronus charm hadn't yet formed. Even after trying again and again according to Lupin's method, all that emerged was a silver mist. Even though the ball of light and mist, under his powerful magic, could envelop the entire classroom, it couldn't take shape, never becoming a true Patronus, and thus unable to repel Dementors. He had recently searched the library for the reason, but the books on the Patronus charm focused mostly on how to cast it or stories about dealing with Dementors and Voldemorts, with little information on its background and applications. After all, compared to other magic, this spell's effects were too narrow, and not many people studied it. However, Guan Qiong, now that he had encountered someone who had done research, smiled. I'm trying to cast the Patronus charm, but it won't form. What's going on? Oh, show me how. Adriana's face lit up with understanding. She seemed to know the reason, but Guan Qiong still needed to verify it. Guan Qiong held his wand in his hand and gently waved it in the air. Then, a silver mist of light flew out from the tip of his wand, slowly gathering in the air like a cloud. When casting the Patronus charm, Guan Qiong didn't even need to think about anything happy. The luminous mist appeared. As his magic power surged, the mist grew larger and larger, soon enveloping the entire room, as if plunging into a world of clouds. Guan Qiong had tried to control the luminous mist, but even with his control, he could only manipulate it into basic shapes like circles or rectangles. More subtle changes were impossible, let alone the animal forms that others' patron uses could create. Adriana gazed at the surrounding luminous mist, the light in her eyes growing brighter. Her body began to transform. Tentacles emerging from her body and waving in all directions. Amazingly, upon contact with a luminous mist in the air, her tentacles seemed to grasp a ball of Play-Doh, capable of kneading it at will. Sure enough, it's true. Adriana retracted her tentacles, her eyes gleaming brighter than ever before. What? Guan Qiong, observing Adriana's movements, asked, sending out a beam of light. The path to godhood, boy, Adriana said excitedly, gazing at Guan Qiong. Bestiality, humanity, and divinity, this is the path the Shafik family has studied for millennia. I originally thought it was a dead end, that wizards could never truly achieve godhood, but now it's different. I see that path in you, and it seems you can blaze it. Guan Qiong frowned. Adriana's words weren't difficult to understand. Bestiality, humanity, and divinity corresponded perfectly to the animagus, wizards themselves, and the Patronus charms. It did make sense, even fitting into some mythical trinity. However, if godhood were that easy, the world wouldn't be filled with legends of just one god of death, it would be filled with gods. So, Guan Qiong asked tentatively. So, boy, learn the animagus from me. You should have seen that your Patronus charm won't form at all. That's because you possess the divinity, but lack the corresponding bestiality to counteract it and control it. Guan Qiong had a feeling it wouldn't be that simple. However, Adriana's control and influence over the surrounding light mist was something he had just witnessed. Within Adriana's tentacles, the light mist, which he couldn't precisely control, was easily shaped and deformed like sand. This meant that if the patroness charm was to be fully realized, the animagus's assistance was indeed necessary. Guan Qiong looked at Adriana below, not entirely convinced by her talk of godhood. After all, that was only the path of the Sheffic family. While it sounded reasonable, it hadn't yielded any real results. However, Guan Qiong wanted to fully master the patroness charm. Perhaps he could try to learn it experimentally. When he found a real problem, he could improve it. If that didn't work, he could consider other options. Of course, if this path actually worked, it would be incredibly exciting. After all, that was a god. In the magical world, there was only one god known in legend, the god of death, and there was no news of him now. If one could truly become a god, that would be fantastic. Wouldn't it be possible to go anywhere one wanted? Chapter 281 Dumbledore and Voldemort's Path. I promise you, but if I find any problems with this path, I'll stop at any time. Guan Qiong nodded and agreed. Adriana's gloomy face broke into a grim smile, and her tone became excited. Boy, you'll be glad you made this wise choice in the future, Adriana said. As for problems, don't worry, there won't be any. You see, even Dumbledore and Voldemort took this path, but they just didn't succeed. This was news Guan Qiong hadn't heard before, and he looked at Adriana curiously. Adriana didn't hide anything, and with her tail wagging, she shared what she knew. You probably haven't seen Dumbledore's animagus form, but you should be able to guess what it is. Phoenix. Guan Qiong's first thought was this. Animagus forms have limitations, they can only transform into ordinary animals, not magical creatures. But when it comes to Dumbledore's animagus form, everyone thinks of the phoenix. This seemed counterintuitive, but considering Dumbledore's current magical prowess and his achievements in transfiguration, wizards felt it was possible. Add to that the fact that he kept a phoenix as a pet and his patroness was a phoenix, and wizards speculated that his animagus was also a phoenix. However, no one had actually seen Dumbledore's animagus. Yes, a phoenix, Adriana said. His animagus defied common sense and became a magical beast. This is actually the first step on the path to godhood, the transition from humanity to animality. Dumbledore thus reached the level of demigod. If there really were a hierarchy, he would generally be called the greatest wizard, the wise Dumbledore, Adriana said. As for Voldemort, he took a different path, moving from his own humanity to reach divinity, a divinity of the darkest and most insane kind. Guan Qiong thought of a possibility. Death, indeed, Adriana said. These are things I've personally verified. They've both reached the level of demigods, which proves this path is the right one, so, don't they just need to complete a few more things to become gods? Guan Qiong asked. How could it be that simple? Adriana shook her head. While this path is the right one, it's not easy to follow, especially later on. It takes a lot of time to slowly adapt to both the two, let alone the three. Of course, kid, you have an advantage. You haven't tried any of these paths. Unlike Dumbledore and Voldemort, who only realized they needed to complete the third after they had advanced further, you can develop directly as a trinity, allowing the animal and divine to progress together until the end. That sounds good, Guan Qiong nodded. This was probably based on experience. If Guan Qiong reached Dumbledore's level of strength and embarked on this path to demigodhood, he would probably choose either the animagus or the patroness charm, pushing it to the limit. At that point, completing the remaining elements would require consideration of their compatibility. This was probably why neither Dumbledore nor Voldemort truly reached the level of godhood. One of their paths had reached its end, and when they returned to complete another, their development was inevitably influenced by the path that had already reached its end. Divinity took on the appearance of animality, or animality took on the aura of divinity. Ultimately, it became a nebulous mess. Alright, kid, go back. I'll give you a list of materials and the necessary preparations. Prepare them in advance. As for now, I'm going to check on Black, Adriana said, heading outside. Adriana didn't elaborate on the serious Black situation. Judging by Guan Qiong's expression, he must have been here the entire time, meaning he'd witnessed the entire process, so there was no need for her to elaborate. Guan Qiong watched Adriana leave, thought for a moment, and headed towards the library. He was going to the library more and more often now, not only for the forced time loop, but also for the animagus and patroness charms. He needed to find information on his own to be fully prepared. Sometimes, he truly wished he could split himself off and confine himself to the library 24 hours a day. The afternoon flew by, and just as Guan Qiong had witnessed, Sirius Black, after 12 years in Azkaban, had become considerably more violent. In response to Adriana's demands, he resorted to tearing up the fat lady's portrait. Of course, this was also due to the fact that the fat lady was singing as he approached the Gryffindor common room. Later, after dinner, the students saw the torn-up portrait of the fat lady and learned of Sirius Black's infiltration. Panic spread among them. Dumbledore naturally sent them back to the dining hall, while the professors began the patrol of the castle. Of course, they were destined to fail to find Sirius Black, as the third Guan Qiong, upon returning, saw him, Adriana grabbing his head and running out of Hogwarts and into the Forbidden Forest. Perhaps even Adriana hadn't anticipated the magnitude of Sirius Black's actions, which would put the entire Hogwarts on alert. Of course, the effect was remarkable. Scabbers tried to jump out several times, but Ron caught it each time and locked it in his school bag. Finally, a satisfied Guan Qiong returned to the dining hall using the existence reversal charm. He saw himself using the time turner to go back to the morning, then cancelled the existence reversal charm and seamlessly connected to his past self. However, there were still some differences. For example, he was now standing outside the sleeping bag. Harry looked at Guan Qiong, who was still standing outside the sleeping bag, in confusion. "Qiong, why are you still outside?" Just now, he had just seen Guan Qiong crawl into the sleeping bag, and how could he have crawled out again in the blink of an eye? Could it be that he remembered it wrong? Was it Ron who had just crawled into the sleeping bag? Guan Qiong didn't answer. He looked at the students around him, exhaled, crawled into the sleeping bag, and closed his eyes. A busy day was over. Chapter 282 Professor Lupin's Life Circuit. In the days following the destruction of the fat lady's portrait, the entire school's young wizards were consumed by discussion about Sirius Black. The most puzzling question was how he had managed to enter the castle. Outside, countless Dementors guarded the entrances, and even the road to Hogsmeade was guarded by Dementors. Disapparition was impossible. Hogwarts was enchanted to prohibit it, a spell so powerful that even the professors could not break it. The destroyed fat lady's portrait was removed and replaced by Sir Cadogan, whom Guan Qiong and the others had previously met. Clad in armor and mounted on a grey horse, he stood at the center of the portrait, giving it a somewhat guarded presence. However, while the fat lady occasionally sang, Sir Cadogan had more serious issues. He would spend half his time insulting and provoking others, challenging them to duels, and the other half devising complex commands. The complexity of the commands was no less than the tongue-twisting names of places and events they'd heard in history of magic class. Often, a command said in the morning would be replaced by a new one by the afternoon, causing immense frustration for the students, especially Neville, whose memory was always poor. It had to be said that the serious incident had caused quite a stir in the school, but as time went on, another event emerged that captured the students' attention. That event was Quidditch. Even Guan Qiong had to admit that, despite his lack of interest in Quidditch, it held a crucial place among wizards, much like football in human society. He'd witnessed this firsthand. Just the day before, the students were discussing the loss of Sirius Black and the uncertainty of whether they were safe in school. The next day, they were passionately discussing the Quidditch match, as if nothing else mattered. Even if Sirius suddenly appeared before them, they would have to wait until the Quidditch match was over before catching him. But none of this concerned Guan Qiong. He wasn't particularly interested in Quidditch. If he had more time, he could go and watch, but he was already busy enough. Even with a time turner, he felt overwhelmed, so he hadn't considered watching Harry's match. He'd heard that the first Quidditch match of the year was Gryffindor vs Hufflepuff. It was originally Slytherins, but apparently due to bad weather, Slytherin switched the order, citing Malfoy's arm injury as not yet healed. The Gryffindor players believed it was a Slytherin plot, as Malfoy's hand had long since healed, but there was nothing they could do, it was already decided. And the tactics they had prepared to deal with Slytherin were no longer effective, as Hufflepuff's Quidditch team had a different style of play, and they needed to adapt. As for the details and tactical arrangements between the teams, Guan Qiong didn't quite understand, nor did he have any further information. He was currently focused on something else. Guan Qiong arrived at the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office on the third floor of Hogwarts Castle and knocked. He held a potion in his hand, the same one he'd brought back on Halloween, brewed by Professor Snape and given to Professor Lupin. Guan Qiong understood that it was probably Wolfsbane potion, which allowed werewolves to maintain their sanity during their transformation on full moon nights. However, It only maintained sanity. The transformation was inevitable. And werewolves couldn't transform back into ordinary wizards. And now, with only a few days left until the full moon, the office door opened from the inside. Professor Lupin looked even more exhausted than before. Guan Qiong, come in. Thank you for your help, Professor Lupin said. It's nothing. Guan Qiong entered, handed the potion bottle to Professor Lupin, and watched him drink it in one gulp. Guan Qiong observed Professor Lupin's condition through his magical vision. Professor Lupin's life circuits differed from those of other wizards. It was a unique state. Previously, the life circuits within Professor Lupin's body were no different from those of ordinary wizards, except that they glowed green and shimmered, as if flowing. As time approached, as if guided by some intuition, the life circuits within Professor Lupin's body began to slowly curl up. Simultaneously, a magical skeleton began to form above them, extending outward. However, the magical skeleton was still in its component parts, not yet fully expanded, so Professor Lupin's body had not yet undergone any transformation. However, with time, the final transformation was inevitable. That is, transformation into a werewolf. It was a bit like an animagus, but the switch wasn't in the wizard's hands. Instead, it changed autonomously, uncontrollably, with the passage of time and the influence of external factors. Guan Qiong thought to himself. On full moon nights, the surroundings do undergo some subtle changes. The magical composition of the air changes slightly, making certain magics easier to perform, such as divination and astrology, and werewolves are clearly among them. As Guan Qiong drank the wolfsbane potion, she noticed that a portion of Professor Lupin's magical skeleton silently dissolved, much like he had done to Adriana. This dissolved magical skeleton allowed the werewolf who took the wolfsbane potion to maintain his sanity during transformation, thus avoiding harming others. While he still had to endure the pain of transformation and the subsequent weakening, maintaining sanity and avoiding harm was a blessing for a werewolf hoping to integrate into human society. This was precisely why Lupin came to Hogwarts as a professor. Even though he knew the position was under Voldemort's curse, he had no choice but to come for the wolfsbane potion. Thank you so much. I can feel the potion working within me, Lupin said with a smile, looking at Guan Qiong before him. I might need to be away for the next few days. Please tell Professor Snape about my substitute class. I remember you have a class the day after tomorrow, right? Guan Qiong nodded. There was indeed a defense against the dark arts class with Lupin the day after tomorrow. Professor Snape can do it. I trust him, Lupin said palely, and began to pack up and prepare to leave. Guan Qiong also left the office, walked to a place where no one would notice, and took out the time turner. Chapter 283, The Animagus of the Sheffic Family. After a brief moment of transformation, Guan Qiong returned to the beginning of the day. He walked up to the 5th floor and arrived at an abandoned classroom. A sign read under maintenance, and the door was locked with a locking spell, preventing young wizards from entering. Of course, Guan Qiong wasn't among them. After all, he had cast the spell himself. He took out his wand, flicked it, and the door opened. He stepped inside, closing it behind him and sealing it with magic to prevent anyone from disturbing him. In the abandoned classroom, besides Guan Qiong, who had just arrived, there was a large orange cat with a sullen, straight face, as if it had just bumped into a wall. Boy, you're too slow. Come earlier next time, Adriana said, pointing her tail at a large barrel nearby. Inside was a green liquid, steaming and bubbling. Guan Qiong nodded, walked over to the barrel, surveyed the day's progress, then removed his clothes and dipped in. After confirming his intention to conduct research on the Sheffic family with Adriana, she had given him a list of materials to prepare. Generally speaking, the standard animagus procedure involves holding a single mandrake leaf in one's mouth for a full month, from full moon to full moon. Under no circumstances should the leaf be swallowed or spit out. The entire process begins again once the leaf leaves the mouth. On the second full moon, the leaf, soaked in one's own saliva, is placed in a small, transparent vial and exposed to pure moonlight. If it happens to be cloudy that night, a new mandrake leaf must be found and the process begins again. Then, to the moonlit vial, add a strand of one's own hair, a silver teaspoon of dew, collected from a place that has not seen sunlight or human contact for 7 days, and the chrysalis of a ghost-faced hawk moth. This mixture is then left in a quiet, dark place, protected from prying eyes and disturbances, until the next storm arrives. While waiting for the storm to arrive, the following should be performed at each sunrise and sunset. Point the tip of the wand at your heart and chant the incantation, Amato, Animus, and Amato, Animagus. Guan Qiong understood this to be the process of first using the mandrake leaves to absorb the fragments of the body's life circuits. Then, using the unique magic of moonlight and the chrysalis of the hawk moth, the mandrake leaves are activated to transform into another form. In other words, a magical skeleton is first created outside the body, using the mandrake leaves as a foundation. The magic of moonlight likely acts as a catalyst, similar to a werewolf's transformation. The subsequent heavy rain is the effect of the hawk moth chrysalis, allowing the magical skeleton to emerge from the chrysalis during the rainstorm and become fixed. As for the incantation chanted on oneself, its effect is to create a receptive opening in the body's life circuits. Upon consuming the prepared potion, the magical skeleton can be grafted onto one's own life circuits, merging the two into one. From then on, the ability to transform into an animagus became something akin to a natural gift. Because its magical skeleton was directly connected to the life circuit, it required no wand or even magical power. Furthermore, after transforming, the animagus no longer required a supply of magical power, as it was an extension of the life circuit. Much like a person who undergoes special training transitioning from walking on their feet to walking on their hands. Simply eating more food replenished their energy. Undoubtedly, the entire process of acquiring an animagus was incredibly complex and involved numerous details. For example, the selection of mandrake blades, how to eat while holding a blade in the mouth, what constitutes pure moonlight, the size of a storm, and the actual effect of the spell, among other considerations. These details required careful consideration, which is why an animagus was considered a high-level magical power, virtually impossible to learn on one's own. Mastery required the guidance of someone knowledgeable in transfiguration. Fortunately, Adriana perfectly matched this need. It could even be argued that even Professor McGonagall's understanding of this aspect was not as good as hers. Professor McGonagall also studied other areas of transfiguration, while Adriana specialized in the animagus and the patronus charm, reaching far deeper into these areas than Professor McGonagall. Of course, Guan Qiong wasn't studying ordinary animagus magic, but rather the technique studied by Adriana's Sheffic family, which allowed him to transform into magical creatures and unleash the bestiality of the animagus, the opposite of the divine. Therefore, the process differed from that of ordinary animagus transformations. Adriana stood at a nearby table, watching Guan Qiong sink into the barrel. She said, "Boy, to transform into a magical creature, you can't simply absorb fragments of life force through mandrakes like ordinary animagus do. You need to absorb the life force of your entire body. Only in this way can you bear the power of a magical creature." Guan Qiong nodded, pursing his lips. In his mouth, a hard, emerald green crystal was pressed beneath his tongue, continuously replicating the life circuits within his body. It was a lapis lazuli crystal, capable of carrying a powerful life force. A typical animagus transformation simply requires absorbing some of the life circuit's fragments through mandrake leaves, thus acquiring some of its information. This is because the evolution is merely a magical skeleton, inherently inferior to the life circuit. However, the Sheffic family's research has shown that the animagus transformation into a magical creature involves more than just a magical skeleton. Instead, the body is completely covered with a layer of the creature's life circuit. Only in this way can it possess the power of a magical creature. Adriana imagined that the effects of the external potion would shred the wizard's vitality, half of which would be absorbed by the luminous crystal. The potion would then repair the remaining half, preventing the wizard from dying. This would allow the luminous crystal to subsequently evolve into a new life form, and because it had absorbed the wizard's vitality, the fusion between the two would be unimpeded. Of course, this process is also extremely painful, especially the loss of half of the vitality, which can be almost insane. She had assumed Guan Qiong would be similarly affected, but Guan Qiong's condition was different from what she had imagined. Guan Qiong felt as though the life circuits within her body were indeed constantly disintegrating. However, rather than shattering, it felt like two pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, slowly disconnecting at the connecting point. While a bit strange, it wasn't uncomfortable, let alone painful. Guan Qiong lowered her eyes and looked at her right chest. There, a heart was beating. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 284 Snape's Defense Against the Dark Arts. The day before the Quidditch match arrived, and the weather took a turn for the worse. The howling wind threatened to lift Hogwarts Castle off its feet, pounding against its walls like the battle cry of an unyielding soldier. The rain also fell intensified, like a veil obscuring the sky and earth. Even in broad daylight, it was impossible to see anything more than 10 meters away. Everything was shrouded in a hazy haze. Care of Magical Creatures class was forced to move indoors to theory class. Hagrid, perched on the podium, explained the bizarre and fascinating creatures, attempting to mimic their movements with his thick, heavy fingers. It was clear, however, that the students didn't quite grasp the feeling Hagrid was trying to convey, which left Hagrid feeling a little frustrated. The rest of the classes remained relatively unchanged, though there were more lanterns and torches in the classrooms. As for herbology, thanks to the magical protection, the greenhouses remained relatively sturdy, transforming them into a unique venue for experiencing the storm. The transparent glass allowed them to experience the intensity of the storm firsthand, while also shielding them from its effects. It was quite an experience, to be honest. Unfortunately, there was no herbology class today, but rather defense against the dark arts. Gwen and Hermione arrived early via the time turner, while Harry and Ron arrived a little later. They were accustomed to Gwen and Hermione's elusive ways. So, upon arriving at Defense Against the Dark Arts, Harry and Ron weren't surprised to see Gwen and Hermione, who had been walking behind them moments before, already seated in the classroom. However, their expressions darkened when they saw the person standing at the front of the room. It wasn't Lupin, their Defense Against the Dark Arts professor, but someone they least wanted to see, Severus Snape. Snape also noticed them. "I don't think you'll have much time to stand there. Find a seat now, and we'll begin," Snape said in that cold, familiar voice Harry and Ron knew so well, his eyes filled with contempt. "This class is Defense Against the Dark Arts." "Where's Professor Lupin?" Harry asked bravely, not immediately sitting down. "Unfortunately, he's had some health issues and isn't feeling well. So, I've been asked to fill in for him," Snape said with a gloating tone. Seeing his mocking expression, Harry strongly suspected that he had poisoned Professor Lupin's potion, which had caused his condition. Harry was convinced he was capable of such a thing. "I don't think I need to say it a third time. Find a seat, or you'll lose 20 points from Gryffindor," Snape said coldly. Harry then walked to his seat, and Ron sat next to him. "Very well, then, let's begin." Snape glanced around the class and began to flip through the textbook in front of him. He flipped all the way to the last chapter and spoke with a strangely amused expression. "Today, we're going to study werewolves. I'm sorry, Professor Snape, but we should be studying Hinkapunk. We just finished studying Grindylows last class, which is on the first chapter of this book." Hermione raised her hand, but before she could finish her words, Snape coldly interrupted her. "Ms. Granger, thank you very much for the reminder. Unfortunately, I don't need to know this. I'm the one teaching this class, and I feel that Professor Lupin's progress is far too slow." He surveyed the students, his tone calm, his eyes as deep as a lake, inspiring a sense of fear. "As students at Hogwarts, you should learn something truly useful, something you can apply in real life, not learn to deal with those weak, once-in-a-lifetime dark creatures that can be crushed with a single finger." Now, turn to page 394. No one dared to disobey him, and they all followed his instructions, turning to the final chapter of the book, which dealt with werewolves. To be fair, compared to the ordinary, basic dark creatures mentioned earlier, werewolves were indeed far more dangerous. Even in the wild, encounters with dark creatures are rare, and when they do occur, there's no need to panic. Generally, luminescent and fire charms can handle most situations. After all, they aren't inherently powerful, they just appear a bit strange at times. Werewolves, on the other hand, are different. They are wizards themselves, meaning that before they transform, they can hide among human society and behave like ordinary wizards, their habits and other aspects being similar. However, during the full moon, the curse within them unleashes uncontrollably, transforming them into werewolves. In their werewolf form, they become completely irrational and will attack any creature they encounter, wizards or otherwise. Many people are unable to react quickly to the transformation of an everyday acquaintance into a werewolf, becoming infected with a werewolf curse and transforming into a new werewolf. Currently, there's no cure for this curse. In other words, in a single moment, a person's life trajectory can be drastically altered. Whether you were once a top student, a brilliant employee, a son of aristocracy, a successful individual, or anything else, being attacked by a werewolf can completely change your life. From then on, you'll only be labeled as a werewolf. When faced with a werewolf, who appear to be virtually ordinary people, such attacks are often sudden, unavoidable, and difficult to address. Therefore, learning how to discern werewolves hidden in a crowd through subtle observations in everyday life is crucial. This is why the chapter on werewolves is placed last. It's truly crucial. However, Snape clearly had other ideas. He looked at the students below and began to ask his own questions. Can anyone tell me how to identify a werewolf in a crowd? Hermione raised her hand. Even though the chapter on werewolves wasn't taught, she had barely memorized the information after a quick flip through the textbook. But Snape simply glanced over the information and sneered. It seems that no one knows. I really don't know how Professor Lupin usually teaches you. He obviously has a considerable advantage in this area. Okay, now listen to my lecture. Chapter 285 Characteristics of Werewolves. You may think werewolves are far away from you, but it's precisely this belief that has prevented the werewolf curse from being eradicated. In fact, its numbers have only increased in recent years. Snape glanced at the students below, then randomly pointed at one of them. So, if Weasley was a werewolf, and he transformed into a werewolf in your Gryffindor common room during a full moon, and the professors had 15 minutes to rush in and deal with the situation, he stared into each student's eyes with his dark, cold eyes until they all turned away. Only Gwen held his gaze, her expression calm. Then, do you think you could protect yourselves from Weasley's scratches or bites in those 15 minutes? But Ron can't be a werewolf, Harry exclaimed. Who can guarantee that he's sworn a magical oath to you? Or perhaps you know everything he says and does, Snape said sarcastically. Have you ever noticed if he disappears from your sight for periods of time? Or, in certain situations, he seems irritable and unstable, and slow to respond to logical questions. Have you ever carefully observed these things? Snape's words caused the students to look at each other in bewilderment. Dean Thomas, sitting behind Ron, even leaned back a little, as if Ron really was a werewolf and could transform at any moment. I'm not, Ron retorted angrily, but Snape just looked at him sarcastically. It's a language trap. These situations can happen to everyone. Everyone has experienced them. Hermione pointed out the flaws in Snape's words. Snape's expression darkened. I didn't ask you to give me instructions, Miss Know-it-all. 5 points from Gryffindor for interrupting the professor. He glanced at the other students. What? Do you think I'm telling a story? Why hasn't anyone picked up their quills to write down what I just said? Everyone took out their notebooks and wrote down what Snape had just said, specifically the possible behaviors of a werewolf while lurking. Meanwhile, Snape continued to explain. Around the full moon, a werewolf's body undergoes drastic changes that often consume a great deal of their energy. This makes them look weaker than usual, and their complexion becomes pale, as if they have a bad cold. And there's one more thing, Snape smiled maliciously. A werewolf who has transformed multiple times, even in human form, will still have some werewolf characteristics: longer teeth, stronger muscles, and increased height. Of course, these aren't obvious enough and can be explained as secondary growth. However, their hair will be unusually tough and resilient. This is very noticeable. Snape waved his wand, and Harry, below, let out an owl, as a strand of his hair was ripped free and floated towards Snape. He gently twisted the dark strand with a look of disgust, then gently tugged with both hands. The hair snapped in two. He waved his wand again, and Ron also let out an owl, as his red hair fell into Snape's hands. This time, Snape didn't pull it. Instead, he waved his wand, causing it to lengthen and bind to the book on the lectern. The book was as thick as a city wall brick and weighed a considerable amount. But as Snape grasped the hair, the book suddenly swung upward. Ron's hair, though tautly straight, remained unbroken, appearing remarkably resilient. This drew strange glances from everyone, even Harry, stunned. He instinctively turned his head to look at Ron, his body tensing. Like this, very resilient. If you're not afraid of angering a werewolf, try it on your suspected target, Snape said with a smile, a hint of something else on his face. Ron felt the entire class's gaze fixed on him, the heat of their gazes threatening to melt him. Normally, he would have relished the attention, but now, he felt incredibly uncomfortable. Damn it, how could he be a werewolf? He'd always been with the others, never leaving even on full moon nights. Fortunately, the bell rang, and Ron felt a sense of relief. Snape then began assigning homework. Each of you write me a paper on how to identify and kill werewolves. Fill 2 scrolls of parchment and turn it in Monday morning. With that, he left the classroom. The students began to pack their bags and leave. As they passed Ron, they kept a distance, intentionally or not, their eyes flickering as they exchanged glances, whispering something. Don't worry, Ron, you're definitely not a werewolf. You've been with us all these years and never transformed. We can all attest to that, Harry reassured. Of course, Ron nodded. Hermione chimed in, he must have cast a spell during the demonstration. If you don't believe me, try it now. Your hair definitely won't live up to the effect he just demonstrated. Ron's eyes lit up, and he ripped a strand of hair from his head. Although it hurt a little, he didn't mind. As his hands wrapped around the hair, it tore off, just like Harry's hair, nothing special. Sure enough, that bastard Snape, he was just trying to frame me, Ron said angrily. At this moment, Guan Qiong, who had been listening, smiled, extended her finger, and points of light flew from it. If you were really a werewolf, your hair wouldn't be so easy to pull off. Yes, that's right, Hermione nodded. They all left the classroom and returned to the Gryffindor common room. After returning to the common room, Ron went to prove to the others that he wasn't a werewolf. Although after a while, all the students would figure out that it was just Snape targeting him, he didn't want to be constantly looked at with strange eyes, as if he were some disgusting bug. Inevitably, a trend among the students began to pull out other people's hair to test its durability. However, this was just a test. It was obvious that there were no werewolves among the students, otherwise, someone would have noticed something unusual in their daily lives. After all, werewolves transform during the full moon. During this period, they would either disappear or be discovered in the castle. It was something that could not be concealed. Chapter 286 Adam. Ron's story caused a minor stir among the students. After it became clear that Ron couldn't be a werewolf, they started to joke about it, even feigning pain and howling as they passed him, as if they were about to transform. The brothers George and Fred were the most enthusiastic, one playing the werewolf about to lose control, the other the target of attack, and they acted out a play right in front of Ron. I say, enough. I'm going to tell Mom about this, Ron said angrily, his fists clenched. Oh, you're going to tell Mom, George said exaggeratedly, seeming a little scared. I thought you were going to come and bite us, but Fred immediately added to George's words. Their identical appearance made it seem as if they were speaking the same words. They all laughed exaggeratedly. Damn it, Ron, unable to bear it any longer, rushed forward to fight the two men, but was grabbed by one arm each and immediately grabbed. Oh my god, Ron, the werewolf is going to attack us. Good thing we caught him, that way no one will get hurt, right? The two men grabbed Ron and spun him around in circles in the Gryffindor common room, causing the others to burst into laughter. They didn't let him go until Percy arrived. Can you two act like brothers? Percy questioned his two mischievous brothers, looking at Ron's angry face. Aren't we acting like brothers now? The two men asked, pushing Ron into the middle. Damn it, get out of the way, you bastards. One day I'm going to kill you. Ah, what did he say? George asked Fred on the other side. He said he'd bite us to death one day. Sure enough, Ron turned into a werewolf, George said with a laugh. Looks like we need to give him some more love. The two men pushed Ron into the middle and took him away. Elsewhere, Harry envied the Weasley brothers' affection while thinking about tomorrow's Quidditch match. The weather was getting worse, and Hufflepuff, with their steady style, was clearly better suited to such conditions compared to Gryffindor's fast-paced approach. Furthermore, in such weather, the snitch would be harder to detect, making his task even more challenging. Hermione and Gwen were no longer in the common room. They had only returned briefly before running out again, probably to the library or another class. Harry guessed so. In fact, Harry was right, twice. In the library, Gwen and Hermione found an empty seat and took out their homework. At that very moment, another group was rushing to their ancient rune studies class, and their first assignment was a study of ancient runes. It was quite peculiar. At the same time, they were studying ancient runes while also completing their ancient rune homework. By the time the ancient rune get out of class ended, their homework had already been completed, just as the professor had assigned it. After finishing their ancient runes and other homework, the two took this rare opportunity to relax. Hermione read some biographies, mostly autobiographies of ministers of magic or high-ranking officials, while Guan Qiong picked up some books related to time. The forced time loops had become less frequent recently. While they still occurred, they no longer significantly impacted his life. But Guan Qiong never let go of them. He was intrigued by these strange and mysterious time creatures and would visit the library whenever he had time, searching for clues in the vast library. Unfortunately, research on time wasn't extensive. While it was considerable compared to the Patronus charm, it mostly concerned the use of time turners and various stories. A large portion of these stories lent themselves to religious and fatalistic themes, even suggesting the existence of an omniscient and omnipotent deity above time. While Guan Qiong wasn't disgusted by these books, he wasn't particularly interested. After reading 3 or 4, he stopped. His research on time creatures had reached a bottleneck. But today's luck seemed to be good, or perhaps all his efforts had paid off. Guan Qiong glanced at the book in his hands, a flicker of joy in his eyes. The Web of Time was the title of the book in Guan Qiong's hand. He had initially assumed it would be another fantasy novel, thinking he would just glance over it quickly and put it back. But he hadn't expected it to be a biography. In other words, real events, recorded by wizards. Guan Qiong opened the book and began to read carefully. The Web of Time takes place in Germany, approximately 200 years ago. A man named Adam Pangur unearthed a time twister from the ground. He was a hunter, a wizard who, in that era, specialized in slaying ferocious and brutal magical creatures. A little further back in time, they might have earned a title similar to that of a dragon slayer. Adam was a master hunter, possessing a natural intuition that allowed him to instinctively set traps and capture prey in seemingly nowhere. This earned him widespread fame in the German city of Salak. This time turner was unearthed while hunting magical creatures. He had intended to set a trap there, his intuition telling him that digging there would yield something valuable. And just as he had envisioned, after putting the time turner away, within a single night, he had successfully captured the creature, a spiky, explosive pig gone mad. It had repeatedly invaded the wizarding town, causing 3 massive explosions. Now, it lay a mere corpse at the bottom of a pit, another medal and honor for Adam. This wasn't surprising to Adam. After accepting the gratitude of the surrounding wizards, he set out on his journey once again, searching for and hunting these dangerous magical creatures. It was his duty, his birthright, and he was willing to dedicate his life to it. However, he hadn't noticed that within his luggage, the time turner was glowing faintly, its inscriptions flickering. What has been will be again, what has been done will be done again. Chapter 287 The Mystery of Magical Creatures. Adam was excited. After dispatching the spiky, explosive pig, he set out on his journey again, searching for dangerous, mysterious creatures. Of course, if he encountered a vampire or a werewolf, he wouldn't mind taking them out. These dark creatures could often be exchanged for rewards in the surrounding towns. But this time, something was different. He had discovered a unique prey. No, he hadn't discovered it, the prey had discovered him. As he entered the dense forest, Adam felt a strange sensation, like being sucked into a vortex or stepped into a swamp. A gravitational pull tugged at him from all directions. He also felt a gaze, unseen but unmistakable, from somewhere. It was the prey watching him. Or perhaps, it mistook him for prey. Adam stroked his pounding heart. He had never felt anything like it before. It was like facing an ancient beast. The oppressive feeling filled him with immense excitement. Adam possessed a faint trace of giant blood, making him stronger than ordinary wizards and impervious to many spells. This also gave him a fiery temper and a fearlessness. Adam began preparing to capture the magical creature himself. He had a premonition that it would be the most successful hunt of his life, one that would etch his name in wizarding history. He set numerous traps and employed every possible means. Even his newly acquired time turner was put to good use, traveling back in time to search for traces of his prey. However, the prey possessed an unimaginable sensitivity, seemingly able to detect disturbances in time, leaving him undetected even by his return. Several times, he even saw traces of the magical creature near his traps, brushing past him as if taunting him. To capture the creature, Adam increasingly used the time turner's power, sensing his approach. During the most intense confrontation, at the same moment, 8 Adams were active in various locations, setting traps that were practically a dragnet, but each one was evaded by the mysterious creature. He saw only traces, not even a shadow of the enemy. It was like a ghost. But Adam remained undeterred. His intuition told him he was drawing closer to the mysterious creature. With each use of the time turner, An additional atom appeared at each point in time, connecting like nodes on a web. The increasing number of atoms formed an impenetrable web. At the center of that web lay the strange, mysterious creature. Adam didn't know what it was, but he could sense it. He was getting closer and closer to the mysterious creature. The time turners began to be used in large numbers, and more atoms appeared at the same time. If anyone looked down at the vast forest from the sky, they would see an army lurking within. An army composed of only one person. Adam's premonition grew stronger, and he felt himself drawing ever closer to the mysterious creature. Finally, the final moment arrived, and all of Adam's eyes fixed on one spot. Over there, a trap he had set had been set. He excitedly ran towards it, a potion in hand. It was a potion that would activate the giant blood within him, granting him immense strength, far exceeding his current capabilities, but it would also cloud his mind. Furthermore, if he didn't take a tranquilizer afterward, the overpowering giant blood would kill him. This was his most valuable possession, the one he had in mind to defeat the mysterious creature. However, upon reaching the spot, he saw nothing. Only one trap had been stepped on, nothing else. Even the traces that had previously been left nearby had vanished, leaving no trace anywhere. It was as if the mysterious creature was taunting him, mocking the world's renowned hunter. He couldn't even see its tail, everything was in its grasp. Adam fell into depression. For the first time, he began to doubt himself, his past, his ability, his instincts. But he wasn't ready to give up. He frantically pulled out his time turner and poured the potion that would send him into a frenzy. He wanted to go back to the very beginning, the root of everything. He wanted to return to the day he first arrived in this dense forest, lurking in the shadows, to find that person. He was a hunter, and he would not lose to his prey. The time turner's light shone upon Adam's face, and he vanished. The forest fell into silence. Much later, another traveler passed by. In a cave, they found a skeleton 5 times the size of a normal human. Within the skeleton lay a diary, recording the events of the time. Adam's story spread across the world. Some say that Adam's ultimate goal was to capture a time creature. The more he used the time turner, the stronger his aura became, drawing the creature closer until he finally caught and slew it. This refers to the giant skeleton in the cave. As for the diary, it was merely a message Adam left behind, a message he intended for future generations to know. Others claim the giant was Adam, slain by the time creature. Even after consuming the potion that energized him, he was no match for the creature. Most bizarrely, some claim that Adam's prey was actually Adam. He was controlled by time, and his prey was his own powerful past self, possessed by the potion. Initially, Adam didn't understand this, so he left traces near the traps, waiting for the time creature to arrive. Finally, after falling into the trap, he realized he was the prey. Because the laws of time prevented him from meeting himself, he escaped, avoiding himself and, with his superior skills, obliterating all traces of himself. His skills were so advanced that even he couldn't break them. However, due to the potion, he ultimately died in the cave. Chapter 288 Wonderful Time. The day of the first Quidditch match of the school year arrived. In the Gryffindor third-year boys' dormitory, Harry suddenly opened his eyes. The sky was pitch black, the moon's light fading, but there was still no sign of the sun. He reached for his alarm clock and checked the time. It was only 4:30 a.m., but he couldn't sleep. The roaring thunder and the snapping of branches outside echoed in his ears. In just a few hours, he would truly experience the harshness of the weather. Could he really catch the golden snitch in his weather? Harry wasn't sure, so he thought again and again, thinking about the tactics Wood had been laying out, the hard work he had put in, and then other things. For example, what would he have for breakfast? He had to be full to perform well. Unfortunately, he told himself, his body didn't agree. He always had a poor appetite during Quidditch matches. As Harry's thoughts wandered, he suddenly realized that he wasn't the only one who woke up so early. Guan Qiong had also woken up, now looking out a window, lost in thought. "You're awake too, Qiong? Am I moving too much?" Harry whispered, trying not to disturb the others. Guan Qiong turned to look at Harry, shook her head, and looked back out the window. A faint stream of light appeared before Harry. "No, it's the weather outside." Harry stared at the light before him, and for the first time, he felt the power of this magic. At a time like this when it's difficult to make sounds, communicating through light was incredibly convenient. All he had to do was dim the brightness. And Guan Qiong clearly had the ability to do it. Is that so? It's quite noisy outside, Harry whispered. Of course, that wasn't the only reason. The thunder and rain pounding against the walls, while incredibly loud, would have been a perfect sleep-inducing sound under normal circumstances. Plus, Guan Qiong didn't have classes today, and he didn't have to watch Quidditch, so he could have even slept until noon. The reason he woke so early was, like Harry, something on his mind. The weight of that event was so heavy that even his dreams were affected. In his dreams, he saw countless versions of himself, staring straight at Guan Qiong, looking behind her. And when Guan Qiong turned around, he saw another version of himself. One with gray hair. Then, Guan Qiong woke up, unable to fall asleep again. He knew the reason for these dreams was the book he'd read the day before, The Web of Time. Naturally, Guan Qiong connected the book with himself, the temporal creature that had caused his forced time loop. If the book's descriptions were correct, it seemed the temporal creature was himself, a return from the distant future. Of course, this was only a possibility. Research on temporal creatures hasn't yet reached a definitive conclusion. While the description in The Web of Time suggests that Adam had traveled back from the future to the past and affected him, other possibilities exist. For example, a ghostly temporal creature possessed Adam. Alternatively, the temporal creature didn't exist, and Adam encountered a different, more bizarre creature. In a world steeped in magic, all these possibilities are possible. But Guan Qiong still felt uneasy. He couldn't help but think about the time creature. If that time creature was truly his future self, then why had he returned from the distant future to the past? What had he experienced? What did he want to change? Was he trapped by time? Or had he thrown himself into it voluntarily? Guan Qiong didn't know right now. While the answer would surely come to him in the distant future, when that time came, at that point in time, would he still have a choice? A gloom flickered in Guan Qiong's eyes. He truly felt a sense of destiny. He picked up the time converter beside him and touched the inscriptions engraved on the dial. What has been will be again, what has been done will be done again. These words meant that everything that had happened would inevitably happen again after the time cycle. But Guan Qiong now had a new understanding. The time point he was currently in was before everything had happened. In other words, everything he did would happen. Guan Qiong's eyes gleamed. This included contact with his future self. This time, he was ahead of time. As Guan Qiong was trying to process all this, the time turner in his hand suddenly lit up and began to vibrate, silver shards falling from it. When the time turner returned to normal, Guan Qiong looked back at it and discovered that the inscription had changed. The path of destiny is the path you choose and take. Guan Qiong looked at his palm. The silver shards that had fallen from the time turner fell into his hand and then merged into it. Suddenly, a thought, a strange subconscious feeling, occurred to him. He turned to look at Harry beside him. In his mind, when the light appeared in the sky, Harry would get up, leave the dormitory, and prepare to go to the dining hall. And as Harry got up, Guan Qiong's mind stirred, a thought flashed through his mind. Harry would be so excited that he would stumble and nearly fall. And so, in his future perspective, Harry actually did fall, but he caught himself on the bed next to him in time. Then, darkness enveloped him, and Guan Qiong fainted. Away, Harry, lost in thought, paid no attention to Guan Qiong's condition. He quietly waited for the faint light outside. He didn't know how much of the sun's rays would remain after the thick clouds, but it signaled the arrival of daylight. He also thought about telling Guan Qiong about today's match. To be honest, he was still a little nervous, caught off guard by the sudden change of opponents. But when he turned around, he found Guan Qiong already asleep. Harry felt a little disappointed, as he also realized that Guan Qiong didn't have much interest in Quidditch. This meant that even if he told Guan Qiong about all this, she wouldn't necessarily understand, though he would probably listen carefully. Helplessly, Harry continued to hide, waiting for the clock to tick by. Finally, morning arrived, and Harry saw the faint light outside the window. He jumped up excitedly, ready to go to the dining room for breakfast, just as the others woke up. In his excitement, Harry stumbled as he got out of bed, but luckily he caught his balance in time to prevent himself from falling. Otherwise, it would be another hassle. If I had a wound, it would be a problem during the upcoming match. The rain would definitely hit the wound mercilessly, even affecting my performance and possibly even causing me to lose the match. Harry thought nervously, got dressed, and left the dormitory with Ron and the others who had woken up. Guan Qiong was still asleep in bed. Chapter 289 An Accident on the Court. Harry and the others left their dormitories and reunited in the common room before heading to the dining hall. 90% of the students were attending the Quidditch match, making the dining hall packed as never before. There, Harry spotted his opponent, Hufflepuff seeker, Cedric Diggory. He was a handsome student with a sturdy, well-built build, seemingly from professional training. Of all the people around Harry, only Gwen could rival him. But compared to Gwen, Cedric's stature was noticeably larger. Gwen was slender, while Cedric looked explosive. This resurfaced Harry's concerns. In this weather, Cedric's physique clearly held an advantage. Due to childhood abuse at the hands of the Dursleys, Harry wasn't tall, even a few inches shorter than his peers. Of course, this was also due to his frequent nighttime outings. And in the strong wind outside, he clearly wouldn't be as stable as Cedric. His steering and balance wouldn't be as good as Cedric's. Despite his immense talent, Cedric was only a fifth-year student, having practiced in this area for 2 years longer than he had. Harry ate a bowl of porridge with apprehension. Thankfully, perhaps due to the cold weather, his appetite improved. After tucking into a few more pieces of bread, he felt his confidence return. Memories of practice reverberated through his mind. Every acceleration, every turn, every snitch he caught, made him feel incredibly powerful. This was the result of regular, thorough training. Even with the inner apprehension, his subconscious mind would do everything. After breakfast, he followed the other players to the locker room. Outside, the weather had intensified. The rain lashed the ground like machine gun fire, flattening the grass and sending the bare dirt flying, cheering its freedom. Of course, for the powerful wizards at the school, such weather could be changed, but no one had suggested it, and Wood had specifically explained the reason to Harry. A strong Quidditch team isn't afraid of adverse conditions, they can win in any situation. Harry agreed wholeheartedly, but the inclement weather still weighed on his mind. The howling wind swallowed everything else, making it difficult to even hear the voices of their teammates. Wood opened his mouth several times, but didn't repeat the tactics he'd explained countless times before. He simply patted their shoulders and led them toward the field. The conditions outside were just as dire as they'd expected. Thunder and cheers mingled, making it hard to tell which was louder. The audience, hidden under umbrellas and cloaks, peered out, searching for the players on the field, but they couldn't see clearly, only a black speck. Fortunately, the Gryffindor team wore bright red robes, while the Hufflepuff team wore pale yellow, making them stand out on the dim light. As they flew through the sky, they looked like thin threads darting back and forth. At the whistle of referee Madam Hooch, everyone took flight. Thin red and yellow lines shot up from the ground, soaring into the sky, performing various maneuvers. Harry followed, soaring upwards. This was his usual habit, the higher he went, the better he could track the snitch. But today, he encountered trouble. The strong wind swayed him in mid-air, and the icy rain lashed him, sapping the warmth from his recent breakfast in just a few minutes. Meanwhile, Cedric, from the other team, soared effortlessly, like a rising mountain, easily reaching a higher altitude than Harry. Harry had no choice but to change his tactics, circling low, searching for the snitch and exploiting his position to strike first. The other Gryffindor players tried their best to protect him from the bludgers. Flying low, Harry spotted the crowd in the stands, Ron, Dean, and other Gryffindors, as well as Malfoy and his followers. They were making faces at him. Malfoy's already pale face paler in the weather, but he'd insisted on being there, just to tease Harry. He also saw the professors, Dumbledore and McGonagall, as well as Snape and Sprout. Finally, he saw Hermione, and Guan Qiong. Harry's eyes widened. Although the Nimbus 2000 had whisked him past at breakneck speed, he was certain he had just seen Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong was here too. Harry had no idea why Guan Qiong, who had never been interested in Quidditch, was on the field. He didn't have time to ponder the reason before a second later, he spotted the tiny golden speck gleaming in the rain. The golden snitch. He didn't think of anything else. The moment the snitch appeared before his eyes, it captured his entire attention. The Nimbus 2000 flew at breakneck speed, carrying Harry like an arrow piercing the clouds, across the field, towards the tiny golden speck. In the audience, Hermione cheered nervously, grabbed Guan Qiong's arm, and shouted, "Harry's spotted the snitch." Everyone noticed, their eyes fixed on Harry, including Guan Qiong, who had shown little interest in the match. Guan Qiong watched the swiftly flying Harry, his eyes gleaming with a silver light. A fine silver thread entwined itself between his fingers, reaching into the unknown distance. As Harry sped towards the snitch, he felt another powerful pressure, like a storm descending from the sky. It was Cedric, falling at breakneck speed. He had also spotted the snitch's shadow, right after Harry moved. However, he was slower than Harry and couldn't get ahead of him, so he could only try to stop him. It was a normal confrontation. But Harry's Nimbus 2000 was so fast that even Cedric, falling directly from the sky, underestimated Harry's speed. He threatened to miss Harry and fall behind him. At this critical moment, Harry's attention was momentarily distracted. Harry's gaze flickered uncontrollably from the flickering golden snitch in front of him to the empty seats in the stands below. There, a large, shaggy black dog, illuminated by the flash of lightning in the sky, dominated Harry's gaze like the Grim Reaper. His speed inevitably slowed. At the same time, a freezing coldness spread from all directions, causing Harry to shudder. He looked over to see the space beyond the pitch, which had grown incredibly dark. At the same time, something cold and eerie soared through it, emitting a howl louder than the wind. Dementors surrounded the pitch, and the darkness and icy air filled it like a bowl, inverted on the pitch. Chapter 290 Accident. Everyone on the field stared in horror at the sky. Dark, tattered cloaks fluttered like hunting ghosts. They soared through the air, absorbing the joy of the students, whose spirits were high because of the Quidditch match. Like the fragrance of a blooming flower, that joy drew them in, causing them to forget their pact with the Ministry and begin to attack the students. "No, Harry," Hermione suddenly cried nervously. On the field, the Quidditch players plummeted, afraid to remain in the air, afraid to expose themselves to the Dementors. But Harry refused to do so. The moment the Dementors appeared, a chilling aura passed through him, causing him to lose control of his body. He remained suspended in midair, like a soulless puppet. Those with wounds in their hearts are more susceptible to the Dementors' influence than others, and the effects are more profound. Harry was no exception. At that moment, within Harry's mind, the icy aura sliced through his brain like water, surfacing memories buried deep within his consciousness. Just like that time on the train. He heard a voice from deep within his memory, a woman scream, crying and begging. "Don't touch Harry. Don't touch Harry, please, kill me, please." Harry's mind had become as frozen as a lake, completely paralyzed. He could only numbly listen to the voices amplifying in his mind. At the same time, his body finally lost its balance on the broom and began to fall. The audience erupted in gasps of surprise. Fortunately, there were not only students in the audience, but also Hogwarts professors. Guan Qiong had noticed that as soon as the Dementors appeared, Snape had drawn his wand, and it was gleaming with silver light. From Guan Qiong's observation of his magical circuits, Snape had clearly intended to cast the Patronus charm. However, for some reason, he abandoned the spell and put his wand away. His dark, tunnel-like eyes remained fixed on Harry, and his hands beneath his robes were clenched into fists. As Harry, unable to bear the weight and beginning to fall, instinctively took a step forward. Fortunately, the other professors intervened. Professor McGonagall waved her wand, and a levitation spell instantly appeared, landing precisely on the falling Harry and controlling his body. Dumbledore, standing nearby, a rare look of anger crossed his face. Wand in hand, he shouted at the growing number of Dementors in the sky. Expecto Patronus! With a shrill cry, a massive bird flew from his wand, aglow with a blazing silver light, soaring into the sky and bringing warmth to the students below. It was Dumbledore's Patronus charm, the Phoenix. Driven away by the Phoenix, the Dementors flew outward like shadows under the sun, their chill dissipating, leaving only the naturally formed clouds and rain. Those Dementors are getting more and more outrageous. Not only have they failed to find Sirius, they've even dared to attack students in the school, Professor McGonagall said after handing the unconscious Harry to the Gryffindor team, who had them take him to the school infirmary. Her face was stern and furious. After all, this wasn't the first time. Dementors had attacked the students on the train at the beginning of the semester. Although the Ministry of Magic had tried to cover it up by searching for Sirius, everyone knew that the Dementors were actively seeking food that time. Fortunately, the contracts restrained them, preventing any casualties. However, a few traumatized students were in a more serious condition, perhaps due to the resurrection of negative memories. This is indeed something to consider. They've crossed a line. Dumbledore's expression was equally grim. He watched the receding black aura, then glanced at an empty corner of the auditorium. A black dog had crouched there a moment ago, but it had vanished. Finally, Dumbledore glanced elsewhere, toward Gwen and Hermione. They were enveloped in a silvery glow, unlike the other students, whose happiness had been more or less drained away. Dumbledore recognized it as the Patronus charm, though it seemed Gwen hadn't yet fully mastered it. But Gwen was only a third year, and the ability to cast a luminous mist was already far superior to the other students. HMPH, we all know why they're here. With all due respect, Sirius Black has evaded capture for so long. Someone must be secretly helping him, Snape said coldly, hinting at something. They all knew Snape was referring to the absent Professor Lupin. He had missed not only the Quidditch match but also the previous few days' worth of classes, with Snape covering all of them. I trust Professor Lupin, Severus, and you should too, Dumbledore said. I don't want to trust a creature of darkness, especially one who can't control himself. Snape pursed his lips, his face gloomy. Dumbledore was silent, and neither was McGonagall. They all knew about Snape's feud with Lupin, which involved Harry's parents and the fugitive Sirius Black, a complex matter that was difficult to unravel. Snape didn't say anything further. He knew that Dumbledore's appointment of Lupin as the defense against the dark arts professor meant he trusted Lupin and believed in his character. But Snape didn't see it that way. He thought Lupin was just covering it up well. They always lied. Snape turned and walked away, his large cloak spreading behind him like bat wings, bringing with it a similarly gloomy aura as the Dementors had just brought. I'm going to check on Potter, and, by the way, that broom. Professor McGonagall looked in the direction of the Hounding Tree. Everyone's attention had been focused on Harry's fall. No one had noticed his broomstick. Driven by the violent wind, it flew off the field, toward the Whomping Willow. I'll have Phileas take a look at it. I hope it's still in good condition, Dumbledore said, using Phileas as Professor Flitwick's name. I hope so, McGonagall said, sighing, not holding out much hope. It had been a truly unlucky day. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 291 Repair. When Harry awoke in the hospital, he saw a crowd of people desperately worried about him. And a broomstick shattered into pieces. It was his Nimbus 2000. I'm sorry, Harry, no one noticed it before. It got blown to the Whomping Willow by the strong wind. You know, the Whomping Willow has a bad temper, Hermione said hesitantly. Professor Flitwick just brought it over, Ron said regretfully. Harry felt his heart skip a beat. Unlike the phantom pain he'd felt before the Dementors, which had only occurred in his mind, what was before him now was real. The broomstick that had always been with him, the one that had loyally carried him to victory after victory, was now in pieces. It was so broken it could never be put back together again. After a long moment, Harry finally spoke. So, what about the match? He asked, asking about what had happened since he fainted. This time, it was George who answered him. Diggory caught the snitch. He had no idea what was happening at the time, but when he noticed you were about to fall, he immediately dropped it and flew towards you, but Professor McGonagall's magic got there first. George's tone was a little frustrated, but not resentful, just a little helpless. They won, fair and square, and would acknowledge that. Harry was silent. This was another painful experience. Before this, he had never missed a golden snitch. It was just that due to various mishaps, Gryffindor had never truly won. This year was supposed to be an opportunity. After 3 years, his talent had been fully utilized, and his skill and experience had reached a perfect balance. But unexpectedly, they lost in the first match. Although this wasn't his fault, there were other reasons. Hey, don't overthink it. It's not like we don't have a chance. As long as Hufflepuff loses to Ravenclaw, you know, Ravenclaw is very strong, with the strongest tactical system among the houses, Fred comforted Harry. While this was the truth, it didn't change the fact that they lost the first match. Moreover, it looked like his broomstick was beyond repair. What would he do for the next match? Harry was silent, and so were the others. They all knew Harry was feeling unwell, and now they could only stay with him. About 10 minutes later, Madame Pomfrey came over and told everyone to leave so Harry could get enough rest. Everyone left, including Guan Qiong, who had been standing silently. No one noticed that Guan Qiong hadn't left with them earlier on the field, but when they took Harry to the hospital, Guan Qiong was already waiting for them. A thin silver thread stretched out from Guan Qiong's hand, connecting to an unknown location like a node. Is there really no way to fix Harry's broomstick? Ron asked Guan Qiong with a hint of despair after leaving the hospital. He had always believed that Guan Qiong was a man of great power, and perhaps he could fix the broomstick. Guan Qiong didn't shake his head immediately. Before, he had no idea what to do, but now was different. This morning, he had mastered a new power. Though the power was still weak, it didn't seem impossible to try. Guan Qiong looked at his hand. A silver thread shimmered, like a fine river winding through it. This thread represented the power of time, invisible to Hermione and Ron standing nearby. I might be able to give it a try, but I'm not sure. I'd need to research the structure of a broomstick and so on. Guan Qiong flashed a light. Ron immediately became excited. As did Hermione. They all knew the importance of a good broom for a seeker. Without the Nimbus 2000, the Gryffindor team had no hope of winning. Harry was inevitably kept in the hospital ward by Madame Pomfrey. Even though he was no longer ill, he still needed 2 days of observation before he could be discharged. But Ron brought him good news. Guan Qiong might be able to repair his Nimbus 2000. This excited Harry, and he gave Ron the wreckage of the Nimbus 2000 to take to Guan Qiong. As for Guan Qiong, he was browsing books about broomsticks in the library. Of course, more of his reading was about the power of time. Restoring the broomstick was just his first attempt to harness the power of time, which was the root of everything. Over the weekend, many people came to visit him: Hagrid, Wood, Parvati, and even Colin Creevey, a fan of Harry's who is a year younger than him. Their presence filled Harry's heart with warmth, but in the stillness of the night, lying alone in his bed, he couldn't help but recall the voices that had appeared in his mind under the influence of the Dementors. He knew whose voices they were: his dead parents. At night, he chewed on the flood of memories over and over, like chewing on a sharp blade, letting them cut his heart and make him feel the pain. The pain brought him back to the past in his dreams, to the night his parents died. He wanted to change something, to save them, or to avenge them. Sadly, he was powerless, ultimately waking once more to the terrified pleas of despair, spending a lonely night there. Meanwhile, the seeds of vengeance silently sowed within Harry's heart. Finally, Monday arrived, and Harry returned to his normal life. Numerous classes temporarily made him forget about those events. And there was another piece of good news. Can it really be repaired? Harry excitedly asked Guan Qiong on the way to defense against the dark arts class. Yes, but I'm not sure how much performance it will have left. Guan Qiong nodded, and a light appeared before Harry. Repairing a broomstick is both simple and complex. In fact, repairing Harry's shattered broom would cost as much as buying a new one, as all the parts were broken and needed to be replaced. But Guan Qiong now possessed the power of time. Although his mastery of it was limited, he could still use it. Under the power of time, repairing these things defied common sense. However, Guan Qiong had only just begun to master the power of time, so he wasn't sure what the final effect would be. He was like someone picking up a brush for the first time, completely clueless about the principles and techniques involved. But he was able to write something because the brush was in his hand, just like the power of time. Chapter 292: The Power of Time. In the room of requirement, Guan Qiong sat alone in the center. Around him, fragments of wood floated, swirling around him like a planetary belt. In his hands, a silvery force emerged, transforming into strands of silk, connecting the surrounding fragments. He attempted to repair Harry's broomstick while also experiencing his sudden realization of the power of time. Time is a profoundly magical force. As Guan Qiong had previously read in the book A Life Enslaved by Time, Jeremy's friend, with a single word, altered the course of time, allowing Jeremy to survive. In other words, information can influence time. Guan Qiong's reflections that morning had led him to understand some of the laws of time, causing the time turner to undergo a transformation and allowing him to master some of its power. This power wasn't enormous, a mere handful of water compared to the vast river of time, but Guan Qiong's tangible contact with it, his mastery of it, meant he had mastered the art. Compared to other wizards, he was now qualified to begin studying the power of time, and he advanced further and further on this path. This was a unique path. Guan Qiong had yet to meet anyone who had studied the power of time, let alone mastered it. Perhaps only the Ministry of Magic held information on it. This meant that before even reaching the Ministry, he would need to explore the path ahead on his own. Guan Qiong looked at his palm. The silver light, like the light in his eyes, was faint but resilient. Threads emanating from it not only connected the surrounding debris, but also extended to a point in the void, like the nodes of a web. The power of time was incredibly complex. After gaining this power, Guan Qiong noticed that the repair magic he had been using also contained the power of time. It was precisely because of this that magic could restore damaged objects to their original state. Furthermore, the restoration magic could not be used on the human body, perhaps because the human body possessed a unique flow of time, causing this magic to undergo unpredictable changes. With a time converter, Guan Qiong gained a second magical application of the power of time. Guan Qiong called it Destined Event. Is a form of magic, but it requires no incantations or complicated steps. For Guan Qiong, casting this spell simply involves staring at a specific location and deducing what will happen. Then, through his future vision, he sees that event happen, and the spell is complete. It's somewhat similar to Guan Qiong's previously forced time loop. After witnessing an event, the time loop ensures it will happen, as if it were destined. However, unlike the time loop, Guan Qiong can use this spell to alter the course of events, much like the grand prophecy or divine word spells found in novels. In other words, whatever he desires will come to pass. However, this spell currently consumes Guan Qiong's energy and has minimal effects, limited to causing someone to fall or choosing between a pie and a sandwich. Guan Qiong currently has no control over much else. After each use of this ability, Guan Qiong would immediately fall into coma. This wasn't due to excessive mental exertion or physical weakness. In fact, he was physically fine in every way, yet he would faint and only wake up after a certain period of time. It was like being in hibernation. This made Guan Qiong reluctant to use this magic more often. After all, its current effect was too limited, while the consequences were too severe. To Guan Qiong's surprise, his long-standing elective course, arithmancy, unexpectedly connected to this magic. Arithmancy is like scientific prediction in Muggle society, inferring future events through a deeper understanding of information. While, like weather forecasts, the predicted results may deviate from reality, they are far superior to the illogical predictions of divination. In arithmancy, Professor Victor introduced various models for evolving and inferring the development of events, such as the three-element model of cause-process-result and the four-vector algorithm of behavior logic thought guidance. Hermione was incredibly enthusiastic about the class, calling it the most interesting elective. Guan Qiong also found it quite enjoyable. What Guan Qiong hadn't anticipated was that it could be combined with his destiny magic. The things deduced through the arithmancy model, when applied to destiny, not only reduced energy consumption, shortening Guan Qiong's slumber, but also made the events more logical and easier to control. Guan Qiong felt that arithmancy and destiny complemented each other like software and hardware. Unfortunately, destiny wasn't affected by his magic. The strength of this magic seemed to depend solely on its effect on the flow of time. The power Guan Qiong could currently exert was limited to the fragments that had fallen onto him from the time turner, a handful at best. Fortunately, Guan Qiong had discovered a way to amplify his influence. His previous conversation with Dumbledore flashed through his mind, and the vortex of time seemed to swirl before him. In his hand, silver threads connected to unknown distances, joining other nodes and disturbing the flow of time. He was not only here, but also in the library, in 3 classrooms, attending 3 different elective classes with 3 Hermiones, and in an abandoned classroom, brewing a potion prepared for him by Crookshanks. A hint of fatigue flashed in Guan Qiong's eyes. This kind of time management not only consumed the powdered light dust in the time converter, but also took a heavy toll on his energy and body. Fortunately, his bloodline was unique, requiring him to mature longer than the average person. This was evident from the age-increasing herbs in his future potion. The amount he needed was several times, even 10 times, that of others. Furthermore, as time passed, his total magical power increased at an astonishing rate. He was accelerating towards his future, approaching the peak of his power. Although it was only in terms of total magical power. Chapter 293 Repair begins. Guan Qiong surveyed the surrounding Nimbus 2000 fragments. Harry's broom had been completely destroyed by the Whomping Willow. It couldn't have been more completely damaged. Every part had been shattered, leaving no recyclable part. If you took this broom to a professional broom repair shop, they'd likely recommend replacing it with a new one, believing the difference wasn't significant. Replacing all the parts and reassembling them was the same as buying a new one, wasn't it? But Guan Qiong saw hope. He gazed at the brooms around him. Through his magical vision, he could see that the broom's once intact magical circuits were now fragmented, just like its body. With a casual wave of his hand, Guan Qiong controlled the fragments to reassemble, returning it to its original state. However, some small fragments had been lost in the Whomping Willow and weren't brought back, leaving the broom with numerous dents, as if it had been bitten. The magic circuits within it remained connected, but Guan Qiong's piecing them together had already taken shape. This was exactly what he had in mind. After studying the broomstick for the past few days, he had already understood the structure of the magic circuits. While the Nimbus 2000's circuitry was more complex than other broomsticks, that wasn't a big deal. After all, Guan Qiong wasn't trying to optimize it, only restore it to its original state. He extended his wand, and magic converged at the tip, like a point of light during welding. He believed that repairing the broomstick could be done in 2 steps. The first step was to use his understanding of the magic circuits and his own mastery of magic to connect the scattered circuits and restore its interior to its original state. This was similar to the work he had done at Fujin Fukei's shop during the summer vacation of his first year, only the workload was much greater. Of course, because it was still shattered, the restored magic circuits weren't effective. As Guan Qiong's control weakened and the broom shattered into pieces, the circuits would disconnect again. But Guan Qiong had a second step, time magic. As Guan Qiong moved, under his magic, Harry's broom's interior gradually began to mend. Some of the more severely broken parts were forcibly connected with Guan Qiong's vast magical power. While it was unsightly and affected the broom's performance, it was better than being unusable. Once everything was complete, Guan Qiong gently waved his wand, and a silver light appeared at the tip. It was the magical restoration charm, intended to restore the broom to its original state. Normally, this spell could only be used on ordinary objects. When used on magical items or living things, their effects would be reduced or even eliminated due to interference with their own magic circuits and life circuits. But after Guan Qiong mastered the power of time, this magic changed. In his 3rd year, Guan Qiong finally understood the problem he had faced in his first year. Why does the magical circuit of the repairing spell form an indistinct mosaic? That's because the repairing spell involves the power of time. When performing the spell, wizards effectively use their own magical powers to influence the flow of time, affecting the object itself and returning it to its previous state. It's like traveling back in time. But this is only an indirect effect, like shaking a coconut tree to make it fall. While sufficient force will ensure the fall, there's no way to control the quantity, timing, or location of the falling coconuts. Now that Guan Qiong has mastered the power of time, performing the repairing spell is like climbing a coconut tree and picking the coconuts himself. He has complete control over the entire process. Therefore, he can manipulate this magic to affect magical items. Guan Qiong controlled the silver light from his wand, allowing it to slowly penetrate the broom before him, reversing the damage it had sustained. He carefully avoided the intervening magical circuits, preventing collision between the two, and first repaired the broom's appearance. Then, crack after crack began to heal, as if rubbed with an eraser. The entire broom began to take shape, no longer the fragmented state it had been in. Guan Qiong no longer needed to maintain the levitation spells on the individual fragments, she could simply control the entire broom. Then, the silver light from Guan Qiong's wand began to penetrate the broom's interior, like a layer of glue coating the internal wounds, beginning to heal them. Inevitably, when this force came into contact with the broom's internal magical circuits, they began to react and affect each other, making Guan Qiong's repair difficult. Some parts of the broom began to age rapidly, becoming rotten, while others became extremely tender, even returning to their previous untreated state, and even oozing green juices. Guan Qiong had to control her power more carefully, while also exerting pressure on the magical circuits to separate the two. This was a considerable challenge for Guan Qiong. Compared to brute force, the delicate task of repair required much greater energy. Guan Qiong was using the power of time, which was particularly prone to problems. Even a small fluctuation could cause the entire broom to malfunction, forcing him to be extremely vigilant. Furthermore, since the broom still had a lot of debris, Guan Qiong's repair wasn't perfect, leaving numerous holes that would affect its performance. Guan Qiong shelved his wand, exhaled deeply, and surveyed the broom before him. He placed his hand on the broom, infusing it with magic and sensing its operation. Overall, it was working, but like a used car that had been in an accident, it always felt a little off compared to a new one. For example, As the magic flowed through it, a strange noise would occasionally emanate from within, and the broom would vibrate slightly, but it wasn't noticeable. Guan Qiong withdrew his hand with satisfaction. There were definitely no major issues. As for the minor issues, Harry would have to work on them, hoping they wouldn't significantly affect his Quidditch performance. However, since it was already a used car, it was still working. Looking at the flying broom in front of her, Guan Qiong suddenly had a new idea. Perhaps it could be modified. Chapter 294 Marauder's Map. Monday arrived. Although Harry was somewhat saddened by the loss, Professor Lupin's return to class did brighten his mood. Especially since Professor Lupin had already revealed a Fugate's whereabouts, and he believed Harry would soon be able to begin learning the Patronus charm. Of course, there was more to the story. Harry was surprised by how quickly Jean had repaired the broom. Less than 2 days had passed, and he had expected it to take at least a week, perhaps even unrepairable. Unbeknownst to Harry, by another calculation, Jean had actually spent over a week on the broom, but with a time turner, the apparent time had been reduced to 2 days. "Thank you so much, Jean. I didn't expect you to actually fix it, and so quickly." Harry looked at the broom in his hands, feeling the grain. It felt different than before, a bit rougher. He also sensed something potent hidden within it, making it feel difficult to control. "It's nothing," Jean shook her head. His main focus was on mastering the power of adapting to time, and repairing his broomstick was just a side job. It also allowed him to become more familiar with the power of time. "No, this is a tremendous help," Harry said solemnly. As a seeker, the broomstick was arguably their most important companion. Now that Guan Qiong had repaired his broken broomstick, how could Harry not express his sincere gratitude? "Let me think, I have to repay you in some way," Harry said seriously. Guan Qiong had helped him so much that he had to do something. However, Harry pondered over it and realized there wasn't much he could do for Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong was better than him, stronger, and more capable. He even had far more magical items. Harry did have a special item, an invisibility cloak, but Guan Qiong already had unique magic that allowed him to become invisible, and it was a legacy from his father. This troubled Harry, but Guan Qiong didn't seem to mind it, telling Harry not to dwell on it. Time flew by, and it was the weekend again. It was the last weekend before Christmas, and also the last chance to go to Hogsmeade this term. They were excited, ready to have some fun before the holidays. Of course, Harry wasn't one of them, once again the only third year left behind. This made him feel depressed, but compared to last time, this time was much better. After all, it wasn't the first time, so it didn't have any special psychological significance, and he was used to it. Still, it was inevitable to feel sad. Harry walked down the castle corridor, ready to go back and look at the broomstick care guide he had borrowed from Wood. Although Guan Qiong had helped him fix his broomstick, after several attempts, he found it much harder to control, no longer as effortless as before. Wood said he and his broomstick were just starting to get used to it, and Harry felt the same way. He decided to take this opportunity to get in touch with it. But as he was walking up the marble stairs, he was stopped. "Hey, Harry, this way." It was George and Fred, the two of them who hadn't been to Hogsmeade. "What's wrong, George?" "Fred. Why didn't you go to Hogsmeade?" "Hogsmeade's just so-so, we've been there plenty of times," the two brothers said, taking turns, their tacit understanding almost like one person. Harry's face was a little helpless. The two brothers glanced at each other, then chuckled softly. "As for why we came looking for you, we wanted to give you an early Christmas present," the two brothers said, taking turns, carrying Harry to the middle and dragging him to an empty classroom. After making sure no one was around, George closed the door, and Fred pulled a square of parchment from his cloak. It was clearly a Christmas present for Harry. Curious, Harry asked, "What is this?" "Oh, this thing. This is an interesting treasure. Honestly, I'm a little reluctant to part with it," Fred said regretfully. "But luckily, we've memorized everything on it, and you need it more than we do right now," George said. Then, George took out his wand, tapped it against the parchment, and muttered a spell. "I solemnly swear to do no good." Instantly, fine lines of ink spread out like a spiderweb from the spot where George's wand tip had touched them, connecting and crisscrossing, forming one pattern after another. Harry could see Hogwarts Castle and the lawn outside. It was clearly a map of the school. On the map, there were many small black dots, with names written in tiny font next to them. Caretaker Filch, Peeves, Snape, Professor McGonagall, and Gwen. Wait, so many Gwens? Harry stared at the names of Gwens in surprise. On the map, Harry saw more than one Gwen. In the library, in the empty classroom, in the Gryffindor common room, in the dining room, on the lawn, and elsewhere, 6 Gwens. One of them flickered, sometimes bright and sometimes dim, for some reason. Oh, did you notice that too? Guan Qiong appeared in different locations simultaneously. Percy did the same thing before. I asked him what was going on, but he wouldn't tell me. I guess these good students used some special magic, George said, shrugging. You know, if there were a few more of us, they'd learn several times more knowledge. If it were us, we'd probably just be teasing a few more people at once. Don't worry about it, though. If you run into them, you can still say hello, but it's a bit difficult because they always hide themselves, Fred said nonchalantly. He pointed to the black lines on the map that represented roads. Some of them led directly from the school castle to the outside. Harry, this is what you should be concerned about. There are 7 paths leading to Hogsmeade. Filch knows 4 of them, but he doesn't. One of them collapsed before this summer vacation, apparently caused by an explosion somewhere else. Another requires going through the Whomping Willow, which is also quite troublesome. Fred pointed to the last one, which he was going to introduce to Harry. This one leads directly to Honeydukes Cellar. We've used it many times. It's great. You can buy candy right outside, and the entrance is not difficult to find. It's just outside behind the statue of the One-Eyed Witch. You can go to Hogsmeade through there. George winked at Harry and pressed the Marauder's map into Harry's hands. After using it, just tap it again and say, "Mischief over," and it will return to its original state. It's very convenient. Now, it's in your hands. Good luck, Harry. Chapter 295 Trapped in a Net? George and Fred left, their faces lit with satisfied and joyful smiles, as if they had completed a legacy, leaving Harry alone in the classroom. Honestly, Harry was thrilled. After all, he could go to Hogsmeade. Although he had previously claimed not to care, as the only third-year student left, it was impossible for Harry to say he hadn't had any thoughts. As for the consequences of doing so, don't forget, he still had his invisibility cloak. As long as he put it on, no one would know he could sneak off to Hogsmeade, and everything would be fine. Acting on his thought, Harry quickly returned to the Gryffindor common room to retrieve his invisibility cloak and prepare to leave. Of course, he was spotted by Guan Qiong, who was sitting in an armchair by the fireplace. Harry, do you want a game of wizard chess? Guan Qiong shone a light and flew in front of Harry. A ball of silver light floated in his hand, and several silver threads extended from his palm to other places. Oh, no thanks, Harry said, looking at Guan Qiong curiously. Only then did he notice that Guan Qiong had been seen in many more places recently. It was as if Guan Qiong was everywhere, whether in the library, classrooms, or the lounge. He could be seen everywhere. Guan Qiong looked at Harry, a flash of surprise in her eyes, then looked directly at the parchment in Harry's hand. It was a blank parchment, but from Guan Qiong's magical perspective, it was covered in complex magical circuits, clearly no ordinary object. The Marauder map? Guan Qiong guessed what it was, but after a brief glance, she looked away. The Marauder's map could only be used within the confines of Hogwarts. For young wizards, it was indeed a useful magical tool, very convenient for escaping during nighttime wanderings or when making mistakes. But for Guan Qiong, it wasn't very useful. Of course, curiosity was also a factor. After all, this magical item was extremely special, and one could even see the professor's movements from it. Perhaps it was connected to some power within the school. Harry noticed Guan Qiong's gaze, but he didn't hide. Instead, he walked over to Guan Qiong and explained the Marauder's map to him, even demonstrating it to him. This is very useful, isn't it? Jean, you can see Filch's location, and possibly all the passages in the school, Harry said excitedly. Guan Qiong nodded, his eyes gleaming as he looked at his name on it. 6 names? But if he remembered correctly, his plan was to use the time turner only 5 times today, meaning 6 of him would appear simultaneously in this time period. This sounded consistent with what the map showed. But don't forget, one of them was in Hogsmeade with Hermione and Ron. This meant that there should only be 5 Guan Qiongs in the school right now. Guan Qiong looked at his hand, where a silver light flickered. Silver threads connected to other places, forming a web of time. This was something he'd imagined after reading the book The Web of Time. By disrupting time, one could create a vast web, trapping the time creature connected to them in the center of the river. He'd originally thought this would be a long process, but how could it be so quickly? At that moment, the extra name on the map, as if sensing something, slowly flickered, then vanished. Meanwhile, the silver light on Guan Qiong's hand gradually grew brighter, wrapping around one of his fingers and forming a ring-like object. However, that object was invisible to ordinary people, and after Guan Qiong weakened its power, it also gradually faded, becoming a tiny trace on his finger. "Harry, if it's okay, I'd like to borrow this map for a bit." Guan Qiong looked at Harry. "Of course, I'd give it to you if Fred and George hadn't just given it to me. After all, you helped me fix my broom," Harry said. "No, just borrow it for a while." Guan Qiong glanced at the map, memorizing the last place the name appeared, and prepared to go over and take a look. "Of course, that's fine. Do you want to come with me to Hogsmeade?" Harry, invisibility cloak in hand, invited Guan Qiong. Guan Qiong shook her head. There was already a him in Hogsmeade. In fact, that was the original him, who had started using the time turner after returning from Hogsmeade. This him, the last of the six, was the one who was relaxing. After all, a day spent wandering around Hogsmeade, reading, practicing magic, and even helping Hagrid deal with the restless magical creatures on the lawn, he was certainly exhausted. However, he hadn't expected that this last him would discover traces of time creatures through Harry. Unfortunately, after seeing the information on the map, he couldn't loop through time again. Otherwise, an extra name would appear on the map, causing a discrepancy with what he had seen before, causing problems. This meant that the maximum number of people in today's loop could only be 6. Watching Harry walk towards the secret passage with the invisibility cloak, Guan Qiong left his armchair and headed to the 4th floor of the castle. Guan Qiong wanted to check out the place where the name had disappeared. Although he didn't expect to find anything, it was still a good idea to investigate. On the way, Guan Qiong cast a disappearance charm on himself to avoid encountering other versions of himself, and also to avoid being seen by some first and second year wizards, who would have noticed him existing in 2 places at once and caused unnecessary trouble. However, Guan Qiong didn't expect his disappearance charm to be ineffective this time. "Guan Qiong, long time no see. Did you go to Hogsmeade?" Luna stood in the middle of the 4th floor corridor, watching Guan Qiong leave with a tilted smile. Her golden hair flowed down her face, appearing messy yet possessing a unique beauty. Her silver eyes pierced through Guan Qiong's disappearance charm and seemed to see beyond. Her gaze seemed to hold an entire winter, enveloping Guan Qiong. "What are you doing here?" Guan Qiong asked, stepping over Luna and shining a light. "Wait for you to come over." Luna also took out her wand and waved it. The same light spots as Guan Qiong flew out and landed under Guan Qiong's question, arranged neatly. Chapter 296 Guan Qiong at various points in time. "Wait for me." Guan Qiong looked at Luna curiously. "Yes, I saw you were coming here, so I waited for you here." Luna gently waved her wand, and red, green, and white lights flew out from her wand, floating around in a beautiful manner. Her magical skills had improved again, and her control over the Lumos spell had become increasingly refined. Of course, Guan Qiong had long known she was a genius, so she wasn't too surprised. Compared to that, Guan Qiong was more concerned about something else. "Luna, was there any connection with that time creature that had escaped from the future, that future him? Did you see anyone else just now?" Guan Qiong asked Luna, sending out a light beam. "No." Luna shook her head, tucked her wand to her ear, and gently touched the light beams in the air with both hands. The light beams bounced off her fingers like balloons, which was very interesting. "No?" Guan Qiong looked at Luna. Illuminated by the multicolored light, Luna stood beside him like an elf. Guan Qiong believed Luna's answer, but if that was the case, then the time creature had nothing to do with Luna? Could Luna's presence here truly be a coincidence, perhaps because she saw him coming and waited for him? "Guan Qiong, look!" Luna suddenly raised her hand, excitedly showing Guan Qiong what she was holding. Within Luna's hand, the dots of light, controlled by her, combined to form a picture. A picture of Guan Qiong, with black hair, a handsome face, and wizard robes. However, Luna couldn't quite control the dots. They kept floating, making the image of Guan Qiong in her hand appear chaotic, like a reflection in water. Yet, the general outline of Guan Qiong could still be discerned. Luna's face was filled with joy, like a child with a new toy, as she showed Guan Qiong her creation. She had practiced manipulating the dots for ages to achieve this effect. Guan Qiong looked at herself and Luna's hand with surprise. "Very impressive," he exclaimed heartily after a moment, a light-filled image appearing in his hand. It was Luna's image. This kind of image required extremely delicate manipulation of the Lumos charm, controlling the light to different colors and placing it in the correct position. For a second-year student, this was an extremely difficult task. Controlling dozens of light points simultaneously was already a challenge, let alone the more delicate arrangement of them. Even Hermione didn't have that kind of talent. She might be able to manipulate so many light points, but forming them into different images was impossible. And judging by Luna's current state, this wasn't her limit. She looked effortless. "This magic is truly fascinating," Luna exclaimed happily, the light points in her hand suddenly charging towards the image in Guan Qiong's. The two images collided, transforming into a chaotic, dazzling display of light. Guan Qiong chuckled and shook her head, wiping away the scattered light points. A sense of calm settled around them. "You're very talented, Luna." Indeed, besides him, Luna was arguably the most gifted person in the school. This talent was a unique spirituality, not reflected in grades, but in her use of magic. "I've been practicing for a long time." Luna's eyes curved slightly as she looked at Guan Qiong. Meanwhile, in Hogsmeade, Honeyduk's candy shop was packed with Hogwarts students, and no one noticed that someone had quietly appeared among them. Harry quietly slipped out from a hidden corner. After saying goodbye to Guan Qiong, he followed the markings on the Marauder's map to the statue of the One-Eyed Witch and used magic to open a passage there. When he emerged, he was in a cellar. It was the cellar of Honeyduk's candy shop. He looked around. The shelves were filled with all kinds of candies, creamy yellow almond candies, sparkling pink coconut ice cream, honey-colored toffee, and all kinds of chocolates, filling his eyes with wonder. Besides that, there were many other interesting candies. The super bubblegum filled the room with bluebell-colored bubbles, the pepper pussycat made you breathe fire, the ice mouse made your teeth squeak, and the toad-shaped mint ice cream made your stomach throb. Looking at all this, Harry felt an unprecedented sense of satisfaction. Simply being here was enough. Just being here made him feel complete. As for candy, he didn't have much of a craving. Of course, buying some would be nice, too. Harry was walking around Honeyduk's and soon spotted Gwen, Hermione, and Ron in a corner. They were standing under a sign that read Special Flavors, gazing at a plate of bloody lollipops. "How about this? Harry's definitely never tried it. Maybe we should bring some back for him," Harry heard Ron say with a laugh as he drew closer. "Not likely, unless Harry becomes a vampire," Hermione shook her head. "How about this?" Ron pointed to the cockroach candy on the other side. He looked like he wanted to try it himself. "Dumbledore prefers this." Guan Qiong flashed a light to the side. Suddenly, he noticed someone approaching. Turning around, he saw Harry, who had appeared in the candy store, with a look of surprise on his face. But in a split second, he remembered, in the third film, Harry seemed to have used the Marauder's map given to him by the Weasley twins to reach Hogsmeade through a secret passage. Guan Qiong activated his magical perspective and indeed found some special magical circuits on Harry's body. In his pocket, he guessed it must be the Marauder's map, but the Marauder's map could only be used within Hogwarts, so Guan Qiong wasn't very interested. Harry, at this moment, Hermione and Ron also noticed Harry appearing behind them. Hermione screamed in surprise, but quickly covered her mouth. "Harry, how did you get out?" Ron was also surprised, but compared to Hermione, he seemed more excited and less worried. "Hey, Ron, Hermione, and Joan," Harry greeted the three. Hermione and Ron were fine, but when he greeted Joan, he felt a strange feeling, especially since they had just been separated in the castle. But looking at Joan now, he seemed to be unaware of what was going on in the castle. Could it be that their memories would only be unified when they were reunited? Harry wondered. Chapter 297 Ron's Preferences. Harry didn't hide his doubts and told Ron about the Marauder's map. However, there were quite a few students in the candy store, so he didn't take out the map. After listening to Harry's explanation, Guan Qiong didn't have many thoughts. Ron, on the other hand, was a little indignant. "This is abominable. I'm their younger brother, and they didn't even tell me about it. If we had it before, we wouldn't have been caught by the professor on our night outing, and we could have saved Gryffindor a lot of points. Come on, Maybe you've become arrogant after getting this thing, and you might lose more points, Hermione retorted. How is that possible? Ron was angry at Hermione's underestimation, but Guan Qiong nodded on the side, which made him feel very uncomfortable. But, Harry, it's too dangerous. If you leave Hogwarts, Sirius Black could come looking for you at any time, Hermione said worriedly. He might even use the secret passage on the map to get into the school. No, that's not possible, Hermione. There are only 2 secret passages left. The other one is under the Whomping Willow. You know, no one can get through there, and this one is right here. Harry looked around. I don't think the candy store owner is in cahoots with Black, and there are Dementors out there, Harry said. When Ron came back, he'd complained to him about the Dementors patrolling the streets of Hogsmeade. They felt like their happiness was being sucked out of them, and they didn't even have the passion to buy things. Although Harry thought it was partly because Ron had run out of money and couldn't buy many things, but Hermione was about to say something, but Guan Qiong stopped her. Don't worry, it'll be fine. We're right here with Harry. Christmas is coming, and it should be a happy time. All right then, Hermione said nothing more, and Harry breathed a sigh of relief, looking at Guan Qiong gratefully. Then, he saw Guan Qiong pick up the jar of cockroach candy, seemingly ready to buy it. Oh, you're buying this? Qiong, you're not going to eat it yourself, are you? Harry was surprised. Dumbledore likes this. I'm planning to give it to him for Christmas. It might be a nice gift, if he doesn't think I'm ruining his teeth. That's a strange hobby, Ron said. After buying the candy, the 4 of them left the Duke of Candy and walked out into the snow-covered streets. The blizzard dyed everything around them white. After walking for a while, frost covered their faces. The frost stopped at the scarves around their necks, but the cold continued to flow through their bodies, making them shiver. Except for Guan Qiong, of course. Within his body, 2 hearts beat powerfully, generating ample warmth. Simultaneously, he could control a fire spell, creating a thin membrane around his body, insulating him from the cold while maintaining a warm temperature. Looking at the 3 trembling bodies, Guan Qiong shook his head and reached out to grasp Hermione's hand beside him. Qiong, Hermione looked at Guan Qiong in confusion. A moment later, a wave of warmth emanated from Guan Qiong's hand, enveloping Hermione's entire body, making her feel as if she were in a hot spring. He then patted Harry and Ron's bodies, warming them as well. Oh, my God. What kind of magic is this? How can it be so comfortable? Ron stared at his hands in amazement. He felt as if he had suddenly arrived in spring, the cold wind around him no longer affecting him. It's a fire spell. But I used a little trick. Guan Qiong cast a light, this time red and twisting, like a burning sentence. Can a fire spell be used like this? Ron looked at Hermione in surprise. Hermione had used a fire spell to keep warm before, but it simply created a ball of fire, and then they gathered around it. Compared to Guan Qiong's magic, the effect was far inferior. Hermione didn't respond to Ron's question. She was looking down at her hands, her face flushed, as if she'd been drinking. Speaking of drinking, hey, how about we go for a few drinks? The 3 Broomsticks is right up ahead, and Harry hasn't been there yet, Ron suggested. He wasn't expecting to meet anyone, but Harry had never been there before, and he wanted to take him to experience it. Harry, of course, was eager to go. He'd always heard of the 3 Broomsticks and had a butterbeer that the Weasley twins and Ron had brought back, so he was naturally very curious about them. As for other places, like the Shrieking Shack or Zonko's Joke Shop, they could save that for later. They crossed the street and arrived at the bar. Compared to the Leaky Cauldron, the 3 Broomsticks was much cleaner, perhaps because most of its customers came from the nearby school, and the students were generally more polite. Besides that, it had other unique features compared to the Leaky Cauldron. For example, its owner, Madame Rosmerta, was a striking woman with graceful curves, exuding the allure of a mature woman. It felt as if time had turned back from winter to autumn. Her unique, mellow, fragrant charm was simply irresistible. In fact, most of the wizards who came here were drawn to her, including Ron. Ron blushed the moment he laid eyes on her, just like Hermione had just done, even though from this angle, he could only see Madame Rosmerta's profile, not her face. That's Madame Rosmerta, I'll get the drinks, Ron said, and without a word of response from the others, he ran towards the bar. Harry, Jean, and Hermione had to grab a seat and wait for Ron's return. But as they sat down, Jean suddenly glanced at the wall, as if something was there. What's wrong, Jean? Harry asked, puzzled. Someone's coming. A point of light appeared in front of Harry, and Guan Qiong suddenly waved his hand lightly. A magic spell came out from his hand and fell on Harry in front of him. It was an existence elimination spell. Harry's figure slowly disappeared in front of several people until he could no longer be seen. After a while, the door of the bar was suddenly opened, and Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick, as well as Hagrid and Minister of Magic Fudge, walked in from outside. "Oh my God," Hermione exclaimed in a low voice. Fortunately, Harry had been hidden by Guan Qiong, so there was no need to worry about being discovered by them. Ron also came back at this time, holding 4 cups of hot butterbeer in his hands. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 298 Harry's Anger. Professor McGonagall and her companions sat at a table not far from Guan Qiong and the others, separated by a Christmas tree, obscuring their attention from the students nearby. They then began discussing the matter of Sirius Black. The attack on the fat lady's portrait had drawn considerable attention from the Ministry, prompting Minister Fudge to personally inspect the situation. However, he likely couldn't see anything, merely pretending to take Sirius Black's case seriously, thus preserving his political standing. Guan Qiong listened to their conversation with a sidelong ear. Their voices were quiet, but the distance between the two tables allowed for clear hearing. At the outset, Madame Rosmerta complained to Fudge about the Dementors, saying they were causing a significant decline in business throughout Hogsmeade. The students and other wizards who came here were looking for fun, but the Dementors' patrols of the streets diminished their enjoyment. Even when the Dementors weren't actively seeking food, their presence could still leave a lingering impression, as if their nature was oppressive. Fudge treated the famously beautiful bar owner of Hogsmeade with complete courtesy. His only apology for her complaints was a plea for understanding. After all, the Sirius Black incident had a profound impact, and everyone wanted to quickly capture him and send him to Azkaban. They then discussed Sirius Black's past, his mischievous ways, and his close relationship with James Potter. So close, in the end, that James Potter chose Sirius Black as the secret keeper for his Fidelius charm. While that was usually reserved for those closest and most trusted, most often their parents or spouses, James chose to trust Sirius Black. However, Sirius Black betrayed them and revealed everything to the you-know-who, leading to the deaths of Harry's parents that night. Of course, this also led to the you-know-who's downfall. His usually invincible killing curse failed when it struck Harry, even injuring himself and causing him to disappear from sight. Everyone said he was dead, though some believers, or those frightened, claimed that you-know-who still lingered somewhere, awaiting a chance to rise again. Everyone believed Sirius Black to be a devoted follower of you-know-who. To ensure an unimpeded return, he escaped from Azkaban and ventured into the vicinity of Hogwarts, seeking an opportunity to attack Harry, the boy who lived and the savior. The conversation ended with a discussion of Sirius Black's final madness. He used magic to blow up an entire street, killing 12 muggles and 1 wizard. Such power was unattainable for ordinary wizards, and it was a key reason the wizarding community believed he had joined you-know-who. He betrayed his best friend to gain the immense power he possessed, and he used it to murder another ordinary friend who had come to stop him, Peter Pettigrew. He had once been a friend and a henchman of James and Black, but was brutally murdered by Black, leaving only a pile of blood-stained robes and fragments of his body, the largest of which was a severed finger. According to eyewitnesses, Peter Pettigrew's grief at the news of James's murder led him to seek out Sirius Black, earning him the Order of Merlin, First Class. After all, it was he who risked his life to stop Sirius Black, paving the way for the Ministry's law enforcement squad to pursue him. At this point, Professor McGonagall sighed. She remembered the boy as a coward, a mere follower of Sirius Black and James Potter, but she had never imagined he possessed such courage. Gwen listened to Professor McGonagall's conversation, unresponsive. Hermione and Ron, however, paled, their faces grim as they gazed grimly at the lone empty seat among the group. Harry sat there, and though Gwen's magic prevented them from seeing, they were certain he had overheard the exchange. A short while later, Professor McGonagall and the others hurried away. Fudge went to have dinner with Dumbledore to discuss the Sirius Black matter. Dumbledore had been reluctant to allow the Dementors into Hogwarts, a matter that was causing him immense headaches. After all, He believed that if the Dementors were allowed into the school and stayed close to Harry, Sirius's target, they would be able to wait for Sirius to arrive and capture him. Just like last time, if the Dementors were inside, they would have been captured when Sirius Black destroyed the portrait. However, Dumbledore was unexpectedly stubborn about this matter, and the other professors were also unwilling to do so, which made Fudge very upset. After all, every day Sirius was away was a day that he, as Minister of Magic, was derelict in his duty. The wizards of the British wizarding world didn't care how difficult it was to catch a fugitive, they only cared about the outcome. Fudge had received more than one letter, especially from wizarding parents with children attending Hogwarts, demanding a guarantee that Sirius Black would be apprehended. This included some nobles. As Fudge and the others departed, Gwen removed the magic from Harry, his expression glazed and furious. "I'll kill him. I'll kill Sirius Black." After a long pause, Harry managed to utter a single word, his tone filled with unprecedented fury. Meanwhile, at the edge of the Forbidden Forest at Hogwarts, where it met the lawn, Gwen entered the forest and, as expected, saw a cat and a large black dog. After visiting Hogsmeade, he had returned to this point in time using the time turner, having noticed Crookshanks quietly leave the castle and head into the Forbidden Forest. Gwen, having been instructed by Dumbledore, naturally followed to investigate. However, having just heard about Sirius Black and the three broomsticks, and now with him right before her, Guan Qiong felt a strange sensation. It was as if there was a mastermind behind this. However, Sirius didn't seem quite right. Before Guan Qiong, countless tentacles erupted from Adriana's body, tightly entangling the black dog Sirius Black had transformed into. Sirius Black struggled violently, emitting shrill roars and a faint look of disorientation. Chapter 299 Beastly. "Boy, come and help." Adriana restrained Sirius Black, uttering a cry to Guan Qiong who was following behind. Although Guan Qiong had cast a dispelling presence charm on himself, the divine aura that emerged after learning the Patronus charm could not be concealed, making it visible to Adriana. Guan Qiong hadn't yet grasped the nature of the divine being Adriana was referring to, and so had been unable to process it. Following Adriana's call, Guan Qiong abandoned his concealment. After removing the dispelling presence charm from himself, he waved his wand, unleashing the puppetry charm. Simultaneously, the earth, under the influence of transfiguration, transformed into shackles, entrapping Sirius Black. Sirius Black's condition was indeed somewhat strange. From Guan Qiong's magical perspective, the magical skeleton surrounding his body began to transform into a life circuit, though with a more distorted, less orderly, pattern, like a faulty code. Under such a magical skeleton, Guan Qiong's magic was simply twisted and dissipated upon impact, having no effect. Sirius Black also directly knocked aside the stone lock formed by the deformed soil on the ground. The black dog he transformed into was roughly the size of a bear and possessed immense power. Adriana also encountered difficulties. Her strength, even now sealed, should have been enough to suppress Sirius Black. However, as her tentacles touched Sirius Black's body, her own magical skeleton began to slowly twist and transform, as if infected by something. She had to expend even more energy to suppress the changes. Fortunately, Guan Qiong had more than just the puppetry charm. He rubbed his fingers, then removed the ring from his finger, threw it to the ground, and infused it with magical power. The ring began to glow red and transformed, stretching its body. The Midgard serpent, Jumungandr. However, because Guan Qiong hadn't taken the potion of the future, his current magical power wasn't enough to support Jumungandr's transformation into a basilisk-like form. But it was more than enough to capture Sirius Black. Jumungandr's body continued to grow, becoming as thick as Guan Qiong's arm and several meters long. It flowed and coiled around Sirius, taking over Adriana's duties. Sirius struggled against the snake's grip, but the strange changes in Sirius's magical skeleton didn't affect Jumungandr's stability. Instead, it intensified his ferocity and power. Guan Qiong then caused Jumungandr's body to erupt with flames several times, scorching Sirius Black until he cried out, and only then did he stop. "Not bad, boy, you've got some good stuff," Adriana said to Guan Qiong, looking at the limp Sirius Black and the snake wrapped around him like a rope. Guan Qiong didn't say much about Jumungandr, but asked with a light point, "What's going on?" Adriana sighed, licked the hair on her hands, and then said, "The influence of animagus, or bestiality. Learning animagus is inherently a dangerous thing. If you're not careful, It can cause great harm to your body and turn you into a monster that's neither human nor animal. And after learning Animagus, it's not a one-time thing. After all, Animagus is another body different from humans. In a long time in an alternative body, a person's soul will be affected, causing their behavior and thoughts to change towards the animal they have transformed into. People who turn into mice will be more timid. People who turn into wolves will be more ferocious and bloodthirsty, and people who turn into snakes will be more gloomy and don't like sunlight. So, when learning Animagus, teachers will tell you not to maintain the Animagus form for a long time. It's best not to exceed 7 days a month, otherwise there will be problems. Will bestiality appear after more than 7 days? Guan Qiong continued to ask. Yes, at first, they'll have occasional moments where they feel like animals, not humans. Then, they'll lean more and more towards animality, finding it pleasant to maintain their animal form, easy and convenient. And then, they can't change back, Adriana said. She looked at Sirius before her, a sigh laced in her voice. Black's situation is even worse. His time in Azkaban has strained his mental state. His hatred for Peter Pettigrew, coupled with his long struggle to escape capture in his Animagus form, has made his situation even more serious than that of the average wizard. Guan Qiong looked at the black dog before her and had to admit that Sirius Black, now compared to Adriana, was indeed completely different. There was a fundamental difference in their eyes. One was full of spirituality and wisdom, while the other was filled with anger, cloudy, and devoid of spiritual light. What if he changes back now? Guan Qiong suggested. No way. The Dementors are roaming around, and Black can't escape them once he changes back, Adriana said. If that weren't the case, Sirius Black wouldn't have remained in the form of a black dog. Guan Qiong pondered for a moment, then suddenly pulled out a long unused recorder from her pocket and began adjusting it. As Guan Qiong's magic flowed into it, the recorder began to hum. After a moment, a clear, angry male voice rang out. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to kill Sirius Black. It was clear that the boy who spoke these words held an immense hatred for Sirius Black, a rage that threatened to devour his flesh and drink his blood. But Sirius Black's eyes flickered upon hearing these words. Harry, a muffled voice emanated from the black dog's mouth, his gaze slowly clearing. Yes, it was Harry. He knows you killed his parents, and he wants revenge on you. Guan Qiong emitted a beam of light, floating in front of Sirius Black. No. It wasn't me, it was Peter Pettigrew. Sirius Black roared in anger, then lowered his head in agony. If it weren't for him, Pettigrew wouldn't have succeeded. But Harry doesn't know. Guan Qiong watched Sirius Black with great interest. In his magical vision, the faulty magical skeletons in Sirius Black's body were slowly recovering. Another strange force suppressed the development of his bestial nature. Was it human nature? Guan Qiong's eyes flashed with thought. If you don't stay awake and tell him everything, he will remain in the dark forever, and he might even end up being killed by Pettigrew. Guan Qiong continued to goad Sirius Black with words. No, Sirius roared, and his magical skeleton recovered even faster. Although he was still weak, he was no longer as crazy and delirious as before. Chapter 300 Status. Guan Qiong looked at Sirius Black before him. His fear had dulled, and his spirits were waning, thanks to Guan Qiong's binding and burning with Jormungandr. But he had regained his sanity, no longer his previous frenzy. This wasn't caused by any magic, simply by Guan Qiong's mention of Harry. Sirius Black's will, or rather, his awakened humanity, suppressed the changes in his body, allowing the twisted magical skeleton to heal. It was truly fascinating. Guan Qiong's eyes flashed with an exploratory glint, his interest in the worlds of animality, humanity, and divinity, as well as the Animagus and the Patronus charm, growing. Who are you? At that moment, Sirius Black, having recovered, noticed the presence of a young man, apparently a student from the school. He couldn't help but become wary. Let me introduce myself. I'm Guan Qiong. I'm a third-year student at Hogwarts, in the same class as Harry, and a friend of his. Also, I'm a phasic, so I use this method to communicate. Guan Qiong retracted the Jormungandr, and simultaneously, a light flew out of her hand, transforming into lines of words that landed in front of Sirius Black. Sirius Black quickly read through the words before him, a hint of confusion crossing the black dog's face. Can aphasic people also be wizards? How do they perform magic? They can't just cast spells silently from the start, right? That's not something ordinary wizards can do. And, Aunt Adriana? Sirius Black glanced at the large orange cat beside him. Don't worry, he can trust me, Adriana said, wagging her tail. Sirius Black finally felt relieved. Do you know about Peter Pettigrew and me? Sirius asked. Yes, Guan Qiong nodded. Then can you? Sirius asked hoarsely. He wanted to ask Gwen to help bring Peter Pettigrew out and eliminate him. That way, there would be no repercussions at school, Aunt Adriana would agree, and Dumbledore wouldn't be in trouble. But Gwen shook her head, rejecting Sirius Black's offer. That's your business. I won't get involved, Gwen shone. He had enough on his plate and didn't have time to get involved in the affairs of Sirius Black, Peter Pettigrew, and Harry. He was more curious about Sirius Black's recent transformation into beastly form, and the power Voldemort had left in Pettigrew's body. After a moment's silence, Sirius Black spoke in a deep voice. I see. A moment later, as if a thought struck him, he asked Gwen, did Harry's broomstick break down earlier? He had been at the stadium to watch Harry's game, and although he had left when the Dementors arrived, he had noticed that Harry's broomstick seemed to drift to the Whomping Willow. He knew the Whomping Willow's character well. Yes, but I fixed it, Guan Qiong replied, flashing a light. However, I heard there's a newer, faster broomstick out now. I think Harry would be delighted if he received one of those for Christmas. Sirius Black's eyes flickered, then his mouth opened in delight. I see. Thank you, Guan Qiong also watched Black with interest. From his magical perspective, as he suggested that Sirius Black give Harry the broomstick, a brighter light appeared within his body, within his magical skeleton and life circuits. The light only appeared for a moment, but it made the life circuits and magical skeleton become more stable, and all the previous loopholes were corrected. Truly, very interesting, Guan Qiong thought to himself. For that day, Guan Qiong was present in various places throughout Hogwarts. He was in Hogsmeade with Hermione, Ron, and Harry. He chatted with Luna in the corridors about campus life. He researched time, enigmas, and the Patronus charm in the library. He listened to Sirius Black and Adriana's plans for Peter Pettigrew in the Forbidden Forest. He also ate in the dining hall and soaked in the enigma solution Adriana had prepared for him in an abandoned classroom. At night, the Guan Qiongs vanished one after another, leaving only one Guan Qiong in the entire Hogwarts castle, sleeping peacefully in her dormitory. The next day, everything came to life. In the morning light, the slightly sweet and cool air filled the air. The young wizards who remained in school woke up, their spirits high. Today was the first day of the Christmas holidays, and all the students greeted their vacation with great enthusiasm. Except for Harry. He was the last to get up. When he woke, the sky was already bright, and endless snowflakes were falling, as if someone had overturned a wash basin in the sky. Hey, Harry, you don't look well, Ron said worriedly in the Gryffindor common room. Next to him, Gwen and Hermione were finishing their professor's holiday homework, which filled 3 full tables. Although they were disciplined and had the time turner, their far greater number of classes, combined with other commitments, forced them to find time to complete their homework on the first day of the holiday. In their first and second years, they had always finished their homework before the holiday, which hadn't been a problem for them. You didn't sleep all night, did you? You look like a ghost, Ron said, scratching his head as he looked at Harry's face. More or less, Harry yawned. He had indeed been awake all night, and only fell asleep exhausted near dawn. The events of the previous day tormented him, burning his heart like fire. Every time he closed his eyes, he would be haunted by the memories. His parents' most trusted friend had betrayed them. Voldemort had broken the protective spell, found their home, and brutally murdered them. He could even hear their screams and pleas for mercy. The Dementor attack had completed this part of Harry's memory. His parents had begged Voldemort to spare him, but Voldemort remained unmoved. Then, there was Sirius Black's sinister laugh, like a demon who had betrayed his friends and abandoned his conscience for power. Harry, we know you must be very angry about what you heard yesterday, but you must stay calm and don't do anything stupid. Hermione, beside him, also stopped writing and tried to persuade Harry. End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.